So before I ask Ustad Abdullah to come up, I just want to give a brief introduction. So Ustad Abdullah Al-Andalusi is an international speaker, thinker, and intellectual activist for Islam and Muslim affairs. He is an instructor and the head of the Department of Occidentology at the Quran Institute and co-founder of the discussion forum at the Muslim Debate Initiative. So Ustad Abdullah has delivered talks internationally on the question on the purpose of life, the existence of God, the miracle of the Quran, the superiority of the Sharia as a social and political system, as well as Islamic economics. Furthermore, Ustad Abdullah has given extensive talks and written articles rationally critiquing secularism, liberalism, secular democracy, and materialism. He has spoken in community centers, universities, colleges, and had numerous appearances on various programs and TV radio channels, including the BBC, ITV, Al Jazeera, Press TV, Islam Channel, and Iqra TV. He also engaged in a number of debates with atheists, secularists, agnostics, liberals, and Christians on a variety of topics from theology to political philosophy. So inshallah, without further ado, I would like to invite Ustad Abdullah to start his lecture.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, as-salatu was-salam nabi kareem Muhammad wa ali tayyibin wa sahbi salihin. I greet you all with Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so we've made it to the second day of the, as one of the colleagues in the UBC MSA said, Kufr Awareness Week, where we'll be discussing non-Islamic ideologies, philosophies, and belief systems or worldviews. So just some ground rules. Anyone that wants to challenge anything I say, has any contentions, you're most welcome to, and please do. You'll disappoint me if you don't. I always tell my students that come into my lectures with the intent of refuting and disproving everything I say. And of course, if you strongly disagree, you will be greeted with welcome, just to make your contentions open, and feel free to express whether you disagree with what I say, whether you disagree with Islam, whether you disagree with even God's existence. Feel free to voice your disagreement. This is an open space for truth and discussion. I co-founded an organization called the Muslim Debate Initiative, and as that might suggest, we welcome debate and discussion. There's no offense given in debate, because debate is about people coming to the truth by expressing different opinions. You can't debate someone who doesn't want to express a different opinion to yourself, and so it's all about then expressing it. So I do welcome it. Now, Marxism is a bit of a complicated bag compared to liberalism, because Karl Marx wrote very copiously, and some of his works weren't even published until many decades after he passed away, and that made Marxists even more confused as to what he believed, because these were earlier writings. So Karl Marx, you'll have difference of opinion amongst Marxist scholars as to what Karl Marx was trying to say. So today I'm not going to be discussing the areas of contention between Marxist scholars, but the very general key concepts of Marxism themselves. Although there'll be issues where I will mention where Marxists will disagree, and I will mention where they disagree. But inshallah, my style of presentation is usually you get these presentation slides, usually at university, and they just give you these bullet points and with just general concepts and say, and the lecturer generally just tells you, this is what, trust me, this is what this people believe, or this person believes, or this is what happened in history. And of course you respect the lecturer. The lecturer's not there to lie to you, and of course you respect their knowledge. I always come at it from the perspective of, as I said, my students attempting to refute me and to disprove what I say. And so my approach is always to make the concept very bullet pointed concept, you could say, and then put a bulk piece of text where the concept comes from, or where you can derive it from the writings, and usually a bulk piece of text because you can see the context. So if anyone disputes the interpretation that I've given, we can just read out the texts in context on the screen. But you don't have to read the bulk text. That's just there in case you want to challenge, or you say, are you sure Karl Marx said that? Well, okay, let's read what he said, and let's read it in context too. Very important. I do understand that there might be people here that believe in Marxism, neo-Marxist, or a shade in between somewhere. Or maybe you've apostated from Marxism and you're post-Marxist. Or you never were Marxist to begin with. Your opinions are welcome here, and as I said, I do invite contentions. So, without further ado, we'll get into it, but we're not going to be just talking about Marxism, because maybe if anyone here studies political science, or they call it political science. Do sir, anyone else? Poli-sci? Any poli-sci? No? Anyone who studies sociology? There must be. Oh, there's one sister there. One sister like, I do. Oh no, maybe I don't. Okay. No, just one? Oh, okay. Well, I was hoping for more. Okay, anyone study economics? Anyone study economics? Too boring for you? No? Don't want to study that? Okay, well, if you study economics, sociology, or political philosophy, or they call it political science, you would have encountered Marxism, because to Marxists, all those three subjects are one and the same thing. Right? And so you probably would have encountered Marxism. But anyway, we will be discussing Marxism, neo-Marxism, and what does Islam say about these things, and where would you stand as a Muslim believing in certain Islamic concepts. And we will discuss what some Muslims who have succumbed to belief in Marxism, how they justify it, and where their thinking has gone awry. So, let's get started. So, in this week, we'll be discussing obviously the Western schools of thought, the madhahib in Arabic, as we call it, the schools of thought. And we will be looking at the right side of things, although I should have put it on the left, I mentioned that yesterday. But we'll be looking at the red branches there, where these two basic concepts in the West, individualism and equality between individuals, which were the two key concepts emerging out of the Enlightenment. Individualism being the idea that the individual is sovereign over themselves. There's nothing higher or more important in value than the individual human being. So not culture, not religion, not God, nothing, just the human individual. And of course, just because they will say the individual is the highest concern doesn't mean that they negate people's belief in God, or they negate culture or religion, but they merely say that from the political perspective, these things will not supersede the individual, cannot supersede the individual, unless there is some pressing need for those things. So the conservative will argue that there might be a pressing need for religion because it inculcates values into individuals to make them behave as responsible individuals, and therefore to aid a society where individual rights are protected, you need to have religion, or you need to have the traditional institutions of marriage, and so on and so forth. So everyone makes an argument after the Enlightenment in the West from the basis of the individual and freedom of the individual, every single school of thought. But where they end up in their discussion, you'll see, is very divergent. So the strand here that we're going to be discussing more is the equality strand. Now, I know I've put them as like almost two separate things, individualism and equality, but a liberal and a conservative believes in equality. A Marxist believes in the individual right for freedom and sovereignty of the individual too. They just put different weighting on those concepts and different interpretations on those concepts. So we're going to discuss the red branch today. The origin of the two political schools of the Enlightenment, you could say, the rationalism from René Descartes and empiricism from Thomas Hobbes. These would lead to generally two approaches to political philosophy in the West. So Anglo-Saxon philosophy, now called analytical philosophy, is the kind that very much people who are liberals and conservatives revolve around, and those who are Marxists, neo-Marxists, social idealists and so on emanate or have some connection with, you might call the rationalist school, the mind first school, the idea that mind precedes knowledge, whereas, or mind precedes is the most important thing in epistemology, the first principle, whereas empiricists would say sensation is the first principle in knowledge. You get your sensation first, that fills up your brain, right? Whereas the rationalists would say, well, actually, before you get outside information, you'll still be able to think and have consciousness, and your mind is the basis for knowledge, without looking at sensation first. So these things led to a divergence of opinion, quite interestingly. To recap, liberalism believes that individual humans are the owners of themselves, so there's nothing higher than the individual. And of course, this is shared by the various other schools of thought. They believe that, of course, good and bad is based purely on respecting each other's self-ownership. You'll find that socialists too believe the same thing. They don't disagree. Socialists and liberals agree on things like people's right to have a private life where they can sleep with whoever they want, as long as it's consensual. They'll believe in those same kind of things. They might believe, or they might have different opinion regarding, for example, can you have alcohol and things like that, but they generally believe that everyone can believe in a religion of their choice and so on and so forth, because it is the individual sovereignty to decide for themselves what they want to believe, rather than a religion that's greater than the individual, which has to be respected. So they will generally agree on, you might call, the private affairs, how liberalism grants private affairs to individuals. The socialists would agree. Where they disagree is on economics. On economics and you could say social relations, but we're going to learn how those things are not different in the socialist perspective. Okay, so, don't know why it's out of focus here. Well, this was a slide we covered yesterday, and it's basically John Locke argues that the Earth, initially, everything on planet Earth doesn't belong to anyone, right? It's common property, you could say. But as soon as you grab something and you work on it, it becomes your property because you've mixed your labor with it, so it becomes yours. He would be disagreed with. The Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo-Saxon thinker will be disagreed with by the French thinker. Of course, not unoriginal. English people and French people disagreeing. That's just old as time. Jean-Jacques Rousseau will argue that the origin of injustice in the world is private property. Private property is the origin of injustice. And he cites an argument that if people fight and kill each other and they rob and they steal and they cheat because they don't have access to property or the same amount of property, you'll never see a wealthy person, this is roughly kind of his argument, you'll never see a wealthy person succumb to some of the predilections that poor people might do, because the wealthy person has everything they need. So they can be good and generous because they don't need anything, right? It's easy to be generous and to be polite and well-mannered when you've got everything you need. You've got everything you need. Not so much when you don't and you have to fight for it. Then there is the origin of what he would say injustice. Did it? Testing? No? Or is it the battery? Oh, seems to be working. All right. So, this would start a divergence between the Western schools of thought. Now, you might think, okay, maybe you agree or disagree, but yesterday I told you, I said one thing to you. I said, if you were to read the books of any of these Western thinkers, and you yourself didn't follow a religion in particular, or any particular one, you would be convinced by every single one's argument, right? And I'm going to argue convincingly for Jean-Jacques Rousseau's argument. Okay, he'd say, we're all equal, right? Don't we all believe that everyone's equal? And everyone will say, yeah, of course we believe we're all equal. Okay, that's great. If we're all equal, then how is it, would it be fair if someone get something when he lacked the merit to deserve it. They got it out of without merit. And someone that has merit, that is capable, is a hard worker, doesn't get something, doesn't get some resources. And they'll say, yeah, that's not fair. So, okay, so then how is it fair that a kid born to a rich family will inherit money doing nothing, and they did nothing for it, and a poor kid born to a poor family that might be very capable doesn't get that money, doesn't get those properties and things. They didn't do anything to earn or not earn what they received. That's not fair. And if there's only this life, there is no hereafter, there is no kind of restoration of justice in a hereafter, restorative justice or retributive justice, then all we have is this life, right? And if all you have is this life, how can you tolerate people getting things unequal to each other? How can you tolerate that? Right? That's very compelling, isn't it? When you argue it from that perspective. And of course, you know, the liberals have their counter arguments, and people along this line of thinking will have their arguments. And each one is very compelling. The liberal could counter and say, well, if you told people that they couldn't give their property to their children when they die, then what is the point of people being entrepreneurs and doing anything to improve their lot when their children won't get anything? Then what's the point? Like you want to build a home, you want to get land, or you want to get shares and what have you, and then that you can give to your children, because you want your children to have a better start to life than you did, right? So then you'd lose motivation. What would be the point then, right? So there will be the counter argument, and they could go back and forth. Of course, and then social would say, oh, but if we had a welfare state, or a state that gave everyone the same education in state schools, then every child would have the equal opportunity, and so who cares if they don't get a lot of inheritance? And they will continue having back and forth. And it's undecidable. You couldn't decide which one was right or wrong, because based on which principles, which interpretations? Good and bad does it have any meaning if you take God out of the equation, if you take human purpose out of the equation? Then which value is more important than any other value? Right? It's just relative. Depends on your tastes, what you think is more important to yourself. Okay, so to understand the differences between liberalism and socialism, I suppose to really break it down based on yesterday's lecture, liberalism's concept of freedom is everyone should be given legal rights to form their economic and social relationships as they see fit. Social liberalism's concept of freedom is everyone should be given the legal right and government assistance to have opportunity to form their economic and social relationships as they see fit. Right? That's social liberalism. And socialism, more simpler, everyone should live in equal economic and social relations, because you're going to be free if everyone has exactly the same power as you in all spheres of life. Right? Then if no one is more economically powerful than any other, then you're automatically free. So no need to kind of focus on trying to create freedom from creating laws and things like that. Okay, socialism has laws, yes, of course, and they believe in equal laws for all, yes, of course, but that's not their focus. Their focus is creating freedom by giving you the social conditions for freedom, which is everyone having the same wealth as you in a way. Now, that's a gross simplification, because socialists will differ as to what they mean by distribution of wealth fairly and equally, but I'm going to summarize it anyway in that sense. Okay, so that's Jacques Rousseau. Jacques Rousseau argues in A Social Contract that wealth inequality creates slaves. If you have more money than other people, and there are people who don't have much money, you can make them do pretty much what you want them to do, or at least you can find someone that would do whatever you want them to do for the right price, and depending on their level of desperation, which will be there if there isn't wealth to go around, or they don't have enough to satisfy their needs. So Jacques Rousseau, not Karl Marx, was the one who argued that wealth inequality creates slavery, a type of slavery. Now, Jacques Rousseau wasn't the only person to say that the government should take money from the rich to give to the poor. Even Adam Smith said that, surprisingly. You think, what? Adam Smith? Isn't he libertarian? No, he's not. He's not libertarian. He's a classical liberal, but he's not libertarian. Classical liberals are different from libertarians in that a classical liberal... Oh, it's cut off again. Is it? I'll just extend my voice then, and I need to test my throat muscles. That's it. Ah, okay. Even better. All right, so where was I? Yes. So basically, the libertarians and classical liberals are not the same thing. People tend to think they are. A classical liberal believes that the state can take your money to give to poor people in the state, because you can't have a bunch of people who are starving on the streets, robbing everybody, and because they have to survive, right? So even a classical liberal has a heart. A libertarian is a very purist liberal, right? They believe no. The state only is there to leave us alone, and only we need the state to protect each other from each other's violence. So we only pay taxes to the state for police, for fire brigade, and for armies to protect from invasions. That's it. You don't give them money for anything else. No taxes for roads, no taxes for hospitals, nothing. A libertarian is a fundamentalist liberal, you could say, fundamentalist classical liberal. But a classical liberal, like Adam Smith, had no problem with gradated taxes for people from the rich to pay to the poor. They didn't have a problem with that. Okay. But the classical liberal differs from the social liberal because classical liberals don't believe that the state should spend money to create equal opportunity. That's not the state's job, right? You know, like let people fare as they will, but not equal opportunity, just equal under the law. Whereas a social liberal would say, no, you need to have equality under equal opportunity. Okay. Rousseau's concept of alienation. He was the one who came up with it, not Karl Marx. The idea that you can... So alienate means to separate, in a way, you could say, to separate from yourself. Self-alienation is where if you sell yourself to slavery, you've alienated yourself. You've sold yourself to someone else. It's no longer... You don't longer own yourself. Right? So Rousseau came up with the concept of alienation. Karl Marx will later take that concept. Rousseau argued that individuals can only be developed by society. They need society to help them develop. They need the right social conditions. The liberal would say that the individual should just be left alone to develop themselves. But Jacques Rousseau actually noticed, or he argued anyway, that you need society to make you an individual. Because you can, in a state of nature, fine, you live in the wild, you yourself are an individual, but then again you face the perils of fighting other human beings and animals and things like this. But in civil society which protects you from the state of nature, civil society is the society that you need to make you into a citizen, a civil citizen, and makes you into a truly developed human being in a civil state. So he talks about you lose liberty going into a state and becoming part of a state. You lose the liberty you had when you were in the wild, but you gain moral liberty, right? You gain moral liberty, which is liberty under rules, right? Liberty under universal codes that protect you. Even Adam Smith noticed that modern society doesn't really kind of develop the individuals. People who have to strive to make ends meet are not developing their artistic side, not developing, maybe they have a creative ability elsewhere, somewhere, but if they are too busy just trying to live day to day, they don't get to develop those characteristics. Adam Smith noticed that. Again, classical liberal, not Karl Marx, right? But it was just an observation of society, right? So Karl Marx wasn't the first person to notice that either. So now we have the famous Friedrich Hegel, who is someone which really changed the continental philosophy, the philosophy of Europe. German and French philosophy is called continental philosophy, not as opposed to Anglo-Saxon philosophy. Now, he was the person who came up with Zeitgeist, right? Spirit of the age. The idea that everyone is a product of their time. You can thank Hegel for that, for at least popularizing that in its formulation. That you are a product of the ideas of the time you live in. That was Hegel. And that was very influential on Karl Marx. But Hegel wasn't so much a materialist, he was an idealist. Hence, that ideas create the material circumstances. Right? Karl Marx would say the opposite, right, which we'll come to. He was the one who argued that history has a type of dialectic. There's a clash of forces in history, always a clash of contradictions which creates change. Because if history has a set of ideas, in each moment there's a set of ideas, what creates change? So change can only come about by, obviously, there must be movement of some kind, but how do ideas move? They move by clashing with other ideas that are jostling with each other for position of being the mainstream. And he was the one who came up with the idea of thesis meets antithesis becoming synthesis, becoming the next idea that will become the mainstream, the next epoch or what have you. And then a new antithesis would be generated that would fight with that, and so on and so forth. Now, Hegel isn't claimed only by the left wing. The right wing also can claim Hegel. He talked about having a state, a rational state, based on rationality. Took kind of the ideas of Immanuel Kant. I'm not going to discuss that here because we're going to a segue. So very interesting to look into. There's the left Hegelians, but there are also the right Hegelians, right-wing followers of conservatives and just liberals who followed Hegel's ideas. So Karl Marx, coming after Hegel, coming after obviously Jacques Rousseau, coming after Adam Smith certainly. He takes all these ideas, and of course he's a materialist. He's an atheist, he's a materialist. He doesn't believe there's this kind of woolly spiritual zeitgeist type thing. He wants to render it into a material process. How does matter generate what you call ideas? He's a strict materialist. He wrote papers on the Greek atomists, who are those who believe that everything's just particles flying through void, everything's just particles. So where do ideas come from if you're just particles, right? So he will attempt to give an answer for that. And so now we're going to go into Karl Marx's ideas, because these ideas, assumptions he has, starting assumptions, generates Marxism, generates his worldview, and becomes how he deems to solve human problems based on his materialism. So let's discuss this. So if you want to know the first principle of Marx, which is take Hegel and say the opposite, right? So Hegel says that ideas come first, and then humans generate the material conditions based on ideas. He'll say the opposite, because you say ideas came first and they create material conditions. But what created those ideas? You know, the chicken and the egg. Well, those ideas came from previous conditions, and that came from previous conditions, and that came from previous conditions. Okay, so take the first human being ever, right? Where did they emerge from in the wild? What were they doing? Well, they were surviving, right? They were trying to survive. They were making ends meet by hunting, by living off the land, physical things. So Karl Marx simply says, well then, physical activities came first before ideas. And physical activities were what? Surviving, right? Working in a tribe or a community to survive. So that comes first. Then ideas come later. But then if ideas come later, the ideas come from what? To which he'll say, ideas come from the material conditions of production, i.e. your economics determines your beliefs. The economic system of any society determines its beliefs and ideas, its religion, the doctrines in that religion, everything. So he says, okay, well, I'll read this quote out for you rather than just making a claim. So he says, Morality, religion, metaphysics, all the rest of ideology and their corresponding forms of consciousness thus no longer retain a semblance of independence. They have no history, no development, but men developing their material production and their material intercourse alter along with this their real existence, their thinking and the products of their thinking. Life is not determined by consciousness, but consciousness by life. So he's arguing that the material production, someone cutting down trees with an axe, someone ploughing, someone using a spade, these things determined the religion of the time, the political system of the time, the culture of the time. Those things were determined by the means of production. And then he further explains that the ideas you have in your head, because the brain has ideas, right? So does that mean that the brain has a mind-body duality? Is there a mind which is separate from the body that can think, like most Hegelians and continental philosophers thought? He says no. The brain is just simply a receptacle. But receptacle for what? Because there's only matter, right? So he would argue the brain isn't a receptacle so much for something called ideas, which are immaterial. The brain merely reflects the material conditions. It's like a mirror in a way. It kind of literally reflects the material conditions of your society, literally its economic system and how they produce things. So everything in your head is merely the economic system that you live under, being reflected in there. Right. Now, this is why Karl Marx would make a major turn. He'd take continental philosophy and he'd make it materialist, and that determined what Marxism would be, basically. Although later on it would turn back to being idealist again via the postmodernists, you might call it, and others, and some neo-Marxists, but we'll discuss that later. So first of all, what do we mean by socialism? Why, if someone's a socialist, what do they mean by that? Right? And why is Marxism a socialist? But not all socialists are Marxists, right? So why can a Marxist is a socialist, but not all socialists are Marxists? Simple. A socialist simply is someone who believes that the state owns the means of production and distributes produce and resources via some idea of equality to the population. Okay? It's equality of resources using the state to do it. So people talked about, the Soviet Union. Right, Soviet Union was implementing communism, but why were they called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics? Yeah, why are the people called socialist and communist at the same time? It's very confusing, right? Well, it's because they were socialist because they believed that the state owns the means of production, owns all the capital, so any piece of wealth or object that generates wealth or generates produce, and the state distributes it, organizes the distribution, the equal distribution of that via the population. If you believe that, you're a socialist, basically. That's what it is. It's quite fair and simple. Not all socialists agree with Marx. Marx actually had an idea beyond socialism, but that's what it means, so at least you know that. Socialism developed. Karl Marx wasn't the first socialist, for those of you who don't know. There were socialists that came before him. He nicknamed them the utopian socialists. He felt they were too idealistic. They noted, like Comte and Saint-Simon, these were the utopian. You don't need to know much about them because they're not really influential, but they saw the Industrial Revolution. They saw how inhumane it was to workers and things like this. They thought maybe we need to go back to a simpler time where humans should live in communes, and they would share resources amongst each other in these communes and go back to a simpler state of nature, you could say. Not going back to being hunter-gatherers, but maybe like the Amish, for example, would be and it was very influential, such that you get the Amish coming out of the Industrial Revolution. You get people like the Luddites who are anti-technology because of the inhumanity seen during the Industrial Revolution in Europe. So this is where the utopian socialists arise from. But Karl Marx would be very much against them. He would think that they're too, pie in the sky, airy-fairy. They don't give any real program of how to achieve their objectives, and they're just too fantastical. And he invents what he calls scientific socialism. right? How you can explain human nature, human society via materialism. Because science is the study of matter, right? Physics is the study of matter, right? Biology is the study of matter. So then the study of humans should also be the study of matter too, and hence science. Although what he argues is not scientific, but anyway. Okay. The major diversions amongst socialists is on what they want to achieve. So a socialist might want to be happy with just simply a state that distributes the resources and is elected by the people, whereas a communist or a Marxist wants eventually the state to disappear and everyone live in an anarchy of collective ownership of the means of production. That's actually the end goal for Marxists, which a revisionist socialist would not agree with. And of course, how do you achieve it? Do you achieve it by revolution, by gradualism, like Ikhwani approach, they say, or do you achieve it with a coup and without bloody revolution? There are differences of opinion among socialists. Don't worry, you don't need to know this aspect because it's not really relevant to Marxism. The other schools of thought so much. Okay, but the first socialist, utopian socialism, we saw Claude-Henri Saint-Simon was one of the first individuals to argue against the industrial revolutions in humanity. He also argued against you could say the first idea of the bourgeois, the ruling class, who are rich and they are lazy because they don't do anything, they just own land and they get profit from the land. So he was the one raising these issues. It wasn't Karl Marx coming up with that, and he also used the phrase to each according to his ability, to each according to his works. Which is from basically everyone who has something to do, who can do something, they should do that, and you should be paid according to the work you do. You know, so if you're a rich, lazy person, you just don't deserve to get paid, basically, right? Karl Marx would borrow that, he'd steal it, and he'd change it a little bit, and he'd say, to each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. So basically, from everyone who works to everyone who needs something, who needs to eat, needs to live, and so on and so forth. He actually stole it from Saint-Simon. Okay, let's start on to Marxism now. You got a bit of the background, the background behind Karl Marx, where he was inspired by different ideas, where he stole different ideas from, and he wasn't the originator of these things, or these observations. What made him different was he rendered it into a fully materialist worldview. That's what made him different from his predecessors. He combined it all into a holistic, materialistic worldview, and he called it scientific socialism. That's what made him different from his predecessors, basically. Okay, Karl Marx lives in the early 19th century. He reads the atomists. The Greek philosophers who believed there was only matter, which was particles flying through the void. He benefited from the patronage of Friedrich Engels, who is technically a bourgeois property owner. He gets funded by a bourgeois property owner to abolish the bourgeoisie, abolish the property owners. So there's some degree of irony there. Now, Karl Marx, or rather Engels is who we have to thank or blame for publishing Karl Marx's work, because Karl Marx couldn't afford to publish his own books, and of course he didn't have much ability to publish anything because he was poor and dependent on Engels, and so we get a lot about Karl Marx's works from Engels, and Engels here describes how Karl Marx is different than the other socialists because he creates this holistic worldview that explains everything from the materialistic view. And that's why he's very popular, he's very attractive, because humans want one narrative. We want a holistic explanation. It's part of, we would say, our fitra, our nature to do so. We enjoy, the human being will believe zealously the first holistic explanation they're given, regardless of what it is. They go, this makes so much sense, and they'll grab onto it. basically. Many students like yourself, when you get to university and you start reading tons of books, and you start to read books that seem to explain everything, some philosopher, some intellectual, some whoever it is, you will start to kind of clasp onto it, and you'll find yourself defending those individuals. Why? Because it makes sense though. You want to grab onto something that makes sense, and you assume it's true if it explains even a few things. It's an unfortunate habit amongst human beings. What we have to do is, of course, you should delay your sense of complete belief until you've investigated every aspect of something, and you've investigated the counter arguments against it too. Right, and made a proper assessment. Unfortunately, many students don't do this. They say, wow, this explains everything, and they jump on board, unfortunately. Okay, Karl Marx, like every Enlightenment thinker before him, was, in a sense, an individualist. Okay, he wanted to free the individual, liberation of the individual, but he simply posited that the individual needs something. Okay, so a liberal would say the individual needs a state to protect your rights, to do whatever you want, to stop people from harming you if they don't like you or they don't like what you do. So the liberal says we need the state to help us be free. An anarchist would say we need no one to help us be free. Let's just be free without a state, without anyone telling us what to do. And the socialist or the Marxist would say that we need the community to help us to be free. Okay. And that's so then you need, the question is, what kind of community is required to help you be free? And Karl Marx simply notes, like Jacques Rousseau said, that if you're trying to survive on bare minimum wages, you're a slave. You're a slave to your employer. You're a slave to your boss. That's not freedom. Yeah, you can quit the job, sure, but you have to find another job, otherwise you starve, in essence, or you suffer in some way, shape, or form. You might think, well, maybe I don't suffer in Canada because we have welfare system here, so you'll get some food, you'll get what have you. But it's not going to be the best kind. It's not going to be the best kind of welfare compared to others. There's going to be some issues. You're not going to get everything. The state cannot kind of give you sufficient welfare for everything you might need on a timely basis. Right, because the state doesn't know you personally, right? And you have to fill application forms, and you have to hope that some civil functionary understands your plight, and so on and so forth. But you need to be fully liberated, according to the Marxists. You need to have a society whereby the means of production isn't owned by these rich people. The means of production is owned by everybody, right? The wealth that can make wealth, right, needs to be owned by everyone. Then you can be free. I'm going to give you an example. This probably shows my age, but there was a TV series called Star Trek Next Generation, whatever, from the 90s. And it was quite popular. And they had this technology, but they're called replicators, right? You just say, I want some food, and you just tap it into the machine. Or you just tell the machine, make me a cake, and it just makes it appear. Right, it just takes matter and rearranges it into a cake, and you can make anything you want then, as many times as you want, basically. And in such a society in the future, they didn't have any money. You don't need money anymore, because anyone can get anything they want at any time. So then you no longer have to work to feed yourself, because you can just use a replicator and it's sorted for you. So then it was some maybe an episode or what have you. Someone from the past was brought into the future and asked, well, why do you work then? And it's, we work to better ourselves. We work because we enjoy it. We work because we pursue our passions. So the Marxists would say, space Marxist. That's an interesting. The Marxists would say that person, then you're free. You're free in that society, because if you work for leisure, you work for fun, you don't work because you have to, then you're free. No one controls you. No one can tell you what to do. You know. I think there was this kind of, I think, a funny clip from this TV series called A Billionaire. I think it was about a rich person that has billions of dollars, and I don't know, someone upset him in this series or what have you. I just saw the clip, and he was trying to be polite to this person to because he needed something from him. Well, he didn't need it, but he was being polite. Then he realized, wait a second, I have billions of dollars. What's the point of having a lot of money if you can't say F you? So F you, and to a government function, and just walked off. Why? Because he doesn't have to be polite, doesn't have to appease anybody, right? Because they're independent, right? They have lots of money, so they don't need anyone. So they are now free to do whatever they want, right? So that's what Karl Marx would say, was arguing. Now, do you see how convincing this sounds? So. I often find that the best way to judge if I've done a good lecture on different ideologies is I first convert you to the ideology during the lecture, make you really attracted to it before I give you the refutations at the very end. So you're all going to be temporary Marxists. I'm sure Marx and the audience would rejoice and just say, well, do we have to cover the refutations bit? Just stop it just before the refutations. That'd be great. Okay, so yeah, he repeats this a number of times where Karl Marx talks about freeing the individual because he's an Enlightenment thinker. I mean, not I think of the Enlightenment era, but he follows the stream of thought of the Enlightenment. He's not some counterculture person. He's counter the Enlightenment project. He's a child of the Enlightenment project, right? It reminds me of there are some there are some Muslims who they decry colonialism. They say colonialism is bad, we need to free ourselves from the West, we can't let the West tell us what to do, and they changed our culture and they changed our education system. I say, oh, that sounds so good and so good. And then you talk to them about their values and they say, yeah, so I believe that individuals, it's my body, my choice, I have the right to choose, hijab is just a fashion choice for myself. And I say, wait, you sound very much like the Western civilization of which you decry for colonialism. That kind of sounds very much like the colonizers. And unfortunately, the irony is that those who decry colonialism are generally the children of colonialism. They are the products of it. They are cursing their own father and mother, right, that produced them. There's no point criticizing colonialism if you yourself are a product of it and you've embraced it. So then what are you criticizing? That they just did it too harshly? They're a bit rough when they did it? But if they weren't rough, you would have taken it anyway, right? It's just a point I note. So anyway, Karl Marx is a child of the Enlightenment, and there's no escape from that. You can find all his ideas. You could probably trace even up to Plato, some of his ideas anyway. Okay, right. Alienation. So this is where Karl Marx uses Jacques Rousseau's idea of alienation, and this is very key. This is very, very key. Okay, so bear with me here because Karl Marx has some very fascinating ideas, which are also a little bit odd in a sense. Karl Marx denies that we have some abstract thing called human nature or fitra, right? What do you mean human nature? You're particles. You're just particles in your body. What particular nature do you have that compels you to do anything beyond just physical processes, eating and sleeping and what have you, right? So he denies that. But then humans tend to do things, and humans tend to have, similar tastes and things like that. So how do you explain that? So he simply explains that what makes you different from an animal, right, is not that you eat and sleep and reproduce and so on, because the animal does that. So what makes you different from the animal? Anyone? What makes you different from animals?
The human is called the rational animal.
Yeah, the human is called the rational. But what does rational mean?
Rational means in the sense that the human can think for themselves. I mean, in Arabic it's called haywan natiq, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
So the human can think for themselves, can think about abstractions, can think about things that aren't really material, but they can at least bring it to their thoughts, I guess.
Okay, so you say that they can think about things that are not material, but we're just atoms and flowing through the void. What do you mean by not material? The not material, the immaterial is immaterial if you're a materialist, right? So what are we thinking then? Okay, we can think. we could think of things that are not necessarily to do with eating and sleeping, whatever, because he would argue that, Karl Marx would argue that an animal could do that. An animal can imagine it wants some food, and imagine it, it wants a mate, and imagine it wants some sleep or a place to hide while it's sleeping. You have ideas, right? You think you have ideas, but according to Karl Marx's principle, which I mentioned earlier on, ideas come from physical activity of the physical activity of human beings in collectives, right? You collectively work together in a tribe or what have you, or clan, or a social union of 30 people roughly, to survive. And that came first before people had culture and ideas and so on. So he'll simply say that your ideas are just a reflection of the social relations of your tribe. Because ideas reflect matter, or physical matter, physical reality. And the physical reality is, beyond just surviving and what have you, is that you are working together with fellow human beings for your mutual survival, right? So then, your ideas in your head are simply this combination of your social group, all their relations together, all how they interact with each other, all that is in your head, I suppose, for want of a better way of putting it. Your thinking is just what, to put it another way, but it's not exactly how you would mean it, your thoughts are just society in your head. Okay? But the physical aspect of society, not some immaterial aspect of society. That's how Karl Marx would argue it. And he mentions it here. I'm not making this up, although you could say he's making this up. But the human essence is no abstraction inherent in each single individual. There's no such thing as a human nature, you might call it. In its reality, it is the ensemble of social relations. So you live in a society, so this is how he would argue it, right? So he would say, okay, let's say you believe in a culture that people should be ruled by their betters, let's say. So if someone is more intelligent than you, that they should be your boss, or they're more capable, they work harder, they should be your boss, okay? That idea was given to you by the capitalist system, whereby those at the top who rule portray themselves out to be the betters of the society, entrepreneurs, and so it's only fitting that they have more money because they are the entrepreneurs that drive society. That is a capitalist fiction that was put into your head, not invented by anyone, but it just represents the system you're in. Okay, so that's how he would argue it. It's very weird and strange, I get that, but that's his argument. That he's pure materialist. Where do ideas come from? Ideas don't come from anywhere. They're just a snapshot of your entire society in your head, basically. Right? You want to have a come back to Karl Marx?
I suppose, because I mean, you gave the example of like being in a capitalist system and that sort of vision or that sort of point of view being put in you. Mm-hmm. But that would make it impossible for you to even question the system itself. The fact that you're able to question the system is, in my opinion, it's one of the things that reflect that there is an inherent human nature where you can see what is right and what is wrong.
Okay, so Karl Marx responds to you in that quotation. Karl Marx would argue that your ability to challenge the system comes about because, so each society is produced by the means of production, the technology it has at hand. But when newer technology is available, which could change things, that's when you realize there's a problem with the previous society, or the society you live in. So the new means of production that comes into being creates the possibility of a new society, and that causes the clash, and that causes you to challenge your existing society. That's how he would explain it, and that's how he explains it there. Okay, for those of you who say, "Are you sure, Abdullah?" Well, yeah, he responds to you there, so I'll let Karl Marx respond to you. Okay, so So then Karl Marx says that you basically, as a human being, you want to be, your essence is a species essence, as they say. All of humanity is in you, right, so to speak, but not in the sense that you're just a human being, a member of a subset of people called humans. No. All the social relations of your society and all humans are in you, and you are only content when you work for your fellow human being as part of the society. But working for yourself just to survive, that's oppressing your natural desire. Your natural desire is, they'll say, for example, just look at the artisanal coffee barista. They love their work. They love serving people coffee. They love it because they're interacting with their fellow human beings, and they're seeing them enjoy themselves and having their coffee and so on and so forth. So they are connecting with the wider people. They say, don't you enjoy making someone happy, or helping someone take their cat from the tree, or helping your neighbors? Doesn't that feel nice? He'll say that's because you are a species being. You're different from animals. You're not selfish, although animals are ants are quite collective. But anyway, he'll say you're different from animals. You're not selfish. Your thinking is of your species, and so modern capitalism makes you selfish, and that creates alienation. It separates you from your nature. Okay? Again, that's how you would argue it. Usually, to explain all this stuff, you'll probably need a course of about 10 sessions or something. There's probably anyone who studied poli-sci, you'll study Marxism over a number of sessions, and they'll spend one lesson on just one of these topics, so I'm heavily summarizing it for you. But that's how he argues. I'm only mentioning this to you not because I want you to write down every single point I mention, but rather I just want you to see how he uses his assumption of materialism to explain everything. Right? That's how he uses his assumption. He'd argue that he nicked an idea from Hegel, or stole something from Hegel. He said that you want to objectify yourself, and that sounds weird because you use the Immanuel Kant understanding of that, but he takes a different way. You want to imprint yourself onto external reality physically. So if I make you a bottle of water and I give it to you, I've made the bottle and I filled it with water and I've given it to you, right? I imprinted myself onto the physical reality of my society by giving it to you. If, however, I'm some functionary in a factory and I just press a button and all these bottles are made, designed by somebody else, filled by someone else, to be given to people that I'll never meet with, and I just get paid a wage for pressing a button, I am alienating myself. I'm disconnected from my species. I'm just a cog in a machine, right? That's how Karl Marx would argue it, basically. Okay, now let's just get into the bullet points here, and because I've in essence, he argues that your consciousness is determined by your economic system. Your economic system is exactly the same as what you call social relations. Your relationship with your neighbors, your relationship with your children, with your parents, with your teachers, with the local government, with the police, with the stranger, these are exactly the same as economic relationships. And you might think, what? I don't employ my neighbor. I don't employ my parents. I say, oh, really? Well, your parents give you resources for you to grow up and survive and so on and so forth. The transfer of resources, that's economic. Yeah, your neighbor, right? You live in even just agreeing with your neighbor not to transgress upon their property is an economic relation, even if that's all you have with them, basically. The teacher is paid to teach you, but again, that's an economic relation, and you pay the university money to do so. So that's your economic relation with your teacher, right? So every social relation you have, even that one that might be voluntary, like you distribute food to the poor on Sunday nights, for example, that's an economic relation because you're still giving them resources. It doesn't have to be just finance, with paid with money. Yeah, it's social relations are economic relations because you only relate to somebody to transfer something with them or from them or whatever, to do services, or to do exchange of commodities, right? So whether you're a masseuse, or whether you cut hair, or services, or you're a waiter, still economic transaction you're having with them, services or commodities. Okay? So from Karl Marx, social relations and economic relations are exactly the same thing. Right? So that's why if you're a sociologist, you study Karl Marx, you'll be studying Karl Marx. If you're an economist, you'll be studying Karl Marx for an academic reason at the very least, because economics and sociology are the same thing to a Marxist. Right? That's what they would say. Now you might think, okay, Abdullah, like, does anyone ever even believe this is called economic determinism? Some people call it economic determinism. Does anyone even believe that? Well, no one believes that in its literal sense anymore, but the idea that you are a product of society around you, of social relations, it will continue after Karl Marx, right? And you don't hear it like that. You hear it using other words. All these ideas you believe, they're social constructs. You need to liberate yourself from social constructs, right? Yeah? That's how you hear these ideas now. They've evolved over time into what you hear today. Okay. The culture, the dominant culture of society is the ruling ideology of the state, or the society is the ideology of the ruling class. You're not following the ideology, the culture, the religion of you, the working people. You are following the culture and religion of the rich people. Why? Because who produces the stories and the movies and what have you? It's not the average guy down the coal mine. Yeah, it's Hollywood. It's those rich producers. It was Harvey Weinstein, right? He produces the stories that you show your kids. Yeah. So it's the ruling class that make the stories, and you consume them. Even in the medieval world, even in the classical world, poets would be given patronage by kings to teach the people or to make their poetry popular. So that's how you would argue it. And here's now, you might think, but what about religion? What about religion? Karl Marx is sometimes misquoted to say that religion is the opium of the masses. You probably heard this before, right? Religion is the opium of the masses. Now, it's not exactly how he means it, but it's close to. He simply says that religion is a reflection of oppressed human nature, you could say. All right? He doesn't use the word oppressed, but I'm going to just summarize it for you. Religion, like you imagine a God up there and a heaven up there because you are denied a heaven on earth, and you're denied connection with your true self, because you've been disconnected from your true self. And so you imagine there's this ultimate self in the heavens and a paradise, because you're disconnected from it on earth as you're meant to be according to Karl Marx, or as you desire to be according to Karl Marx. So he says religion is inverted consciousness, because you have to explain, where does delusion come from? Because surely if you believe that ideas are reflections of reality, then falsehood is impossible. Falsehood is impossible. So he's a bit clever with this, and he says it's inverted. You're like looking for a prism. It's the image has been inverted all the way around. Like the camera obscura, where it produces an image, it makes it upside down. So you have an upside down of you think that God is up there and there's a heaven up there, but it should be the other way around. But he argues it's because society itself is inverted. Capitalism, it's made an unnatural situation that you create a supernatural religion. That's how he argues it. Now, I am baffled how any Muslim can believe in Marxism or call themselves Marxist. I engaged some individuals on Twitter maybe a month or 2 months ago. I made a tweet about Marxism, that some Muslims are adopting Marxism. I was like, really? They've dusted it off and they brought it back. And so I mentioned that Karl Marx is against religion, and they say, "Oh no. He praised Muslims. He thought he thought Muslims were a good force for revolution." Yeah, and I say, it's very naive. Do you know why he thought that Muslims and of course other religions were good forces for revolution? Because religion is a symptom of oppression. So the more religion you have, the more oppressed you are, and therefore you're a great starting point for fighting against the oppression. Yeah, your religion is a symptom of your oppression. So the more religious you are, the more oppressed you are, that means, and that's why you're a great you're great to be soldiers for the new front against for changing this society. They didn't understand. And they were saying to me, oh, you're ignorant about Karl Marx. He loved Muslims. Like, I don't care if he loves Muslims, of course, but he probably views us in a condescending way, like, all these poor guys. They'll make great soldiers in my army, you know, that kind of thing, so to speak. He didn't obviously argue for Muslims being in an army, but basically that's how we're pawns, you know. And today socialists will view, socialists tend to favor anyone who's viewed to be oppressed. Why? Because there'll be great pawns in their army for socialist revolution or Marxist revolution if you're Marxist. So that's why Marxists always interested in recruiting minorities and anyone deemed to be disadvantaged, because you'll be great cannon fodder for them. Send forth the minorities into the fields of fire. Anyway. So this is the entire quotation. It's actually one quotation, but it was quite big, so I put it on both two sides. But you can see there in the middle where he talks about it is the opium of the masses. Religion is the opium of the masses. But what I've just told you is mentioned. He says that the abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is the demand for their real happiness. So the abolition of religion is what he was calling for, because religion gets in the way of your happiness. How any Muslim can call themselves a Marxist, I don't understand, but it doesn't end there. So historical materialism is what I already explained to you, that remember I told you that that Hegel said that ideas change over time because there's a clash of ideas, you know, thesis, antithesis. But there's no such thing as these things called ideas. Karl Marx is a materialist, so he takes Hegel's idea and makes a material version of it. And he simply says that society changes because there's a clash of classes, a clash of forces in society, the ruling class versus the oppressed class, whether it's slaves, serfs, or workers, or the proletariat, as he calls it, right? So that's how he explains it. So it's called historical materialism. Now, Karl Marx argues, how do you change all this? What do you do? Well, simply, you abolish private property. Now, private property is not that you start taking off your shoes and taking off your shirt because it's your private property. No. He calls that personal property. Right? You can have a house, and you can have your own shoes, and you can have your own bags if you like, no problem. But you can't own land. You can't own factories. You can't own anything that produces wealth. Basically, that's what he would argue. Okay, you can't do that. And if you were to abolish capital, it's called capital, wealth that produces more wealth, it's called capital. If you abolish it, then everyone will become one class. And now, Karl Marx didn't believe in equality, right? He didn't believe in equality. And you might think, what? Socialists are all about equality. Well, yes, socialists generally, but why? Because equality is a bourgeois concept, a concept from capitalism, a concept from liberalism. What does it mean, right? He says, forget about that. From everyone according to their ability, for everyone should work according to their ability, to everyone according to their need. It's sufficient. Because people have different needs and different abilities, so equality doesn't make sense. And he was refuting socialists, saying, don't talk about equality. Equality is an idea of the capitalists. Talk about the abolition of classes and the abolition of private property. That's what he would argue. Because he's a materialist. Remember, equality and justice don't mean anything to materialists. Karl Marx is quite a consistent materialist. He doesn't even use the word, he doesn't use the word often of oppression, because that, again, is a very vague term. Equality, vague. Justice, vague. He wants materialist terms, clear-cut material terms. Okay. He argues that if you employ someone and they take a wage, you're exploiting them, because let's say they're doing 100 units of labor, okay? And they generate wealth from that labor. So he argues that the measure of value is how much labor you do. So they do 100 units of labor, and you pay them an amount of money, and you make profit from them. That means that they're not getting the full value of their labor. Okay? So you are exploiting them. So he would be against that. He'd also say that the family is a microcosm of capitalist oppression and must be abolished. He doesn't use the word oppression, but I kind of put there as a summary. In the family, who owns the wealth, or who is controlling the wealth of the family would be the father or the husband, right? And the wife and the children depend on the father, right? He says this is a microcosm, in a sense, of capitalism and should be abolished too. The family structure should be abolished to liberate the individuals, right? So children should depend on the state or be the common property so that they are not slaves to their parents. And of course, the wife shouldn't be slaves to her husband by depending on him to provide money, and so on and so forth, right? Why does that sound familiar? Anyway, okay, so quite simply, the contradictions between Islam and Marxism, very, very clear-cut. Human consciousness is not socially produced. Okay? Adam alayhi salam, what society was he in when he had consciousness? He wasn't in any, he was only one person, right? He was taught language from the Creator. He wasn't taught language because language is a collection of the social relations reflecting in his brain. Yeah? So, again, how you can be Marxist and Muslim at the same time, it baffles me. He was able to use his intellect before there was even a second human being. So how would a Marxist Muslim explain that? I don't know. Now, a Marxist, he would say, this is refute me, I don't believe in Islam. Well, okay, that's fine, but the topic of this series is Islam left or right, not is there rational refutations outside of revelation for these ideologies? That's a different set of lectures, right? This is about Islam here. Islam doesn't fit in Marxism, is my point. It doesn't fit in Marxism. The human brain doesn't reflect like a matter like a mirror. Islam posits that humans store information as knowledge, as ilm, right? It's not a reflection, it is just knowledge. And likewise, you can have falsehood that was concocted by yourself, not by your social relations. And the Quran talks about that. People inventing falsehoods. Yeah? Not society made me invent falsehoods. No. On the day of judgment, you can't say, yeah, I'm sorry, God, I just believed in the truth, but, society, I'm the ensemble of social relations, and so I was determined to believe in these things and to believe falsehood. So, doesn't wash. Marxism holds that religion and God is a man-made illusion to cover up an oppressive world, not deliberately to cover up an oppressive world, but rather produced by an oppressive world, by the economic relations of an oppressive world. Neo-Marxists would come later and say, no, but it is deliberate. It's a deliberate cover-up, right? That will make them different from Karl Marx. And neo-Marxists would argue with me and say, no, Karl Marx didn't believe in economic determinism. According to our interpretation of Karl Marx, we think he believes that that ideology, the ruling ideology, is a deliberate product of the ruling class to fool you. Okay, that is what makes them neo-Marxists and not Marxists anymore. Okay, and they're full of suspicions. They're very suspicious people, because anyone who believes in a conspiracy theory is suspicious, right? And in essence, they take Marxism into conspiracy theory territory, which makes them neo-Marxist. Okay, quick fire round. You could say Marxism abolishes private property, the private ownership of capital. Islam permits it, right? Right? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "Whoever surrounded a piece of land with a wall, it becomes his." Yeah, Jacques Rousseau wouldn't like that, and of course Karl Marx would be in firm objection to that. Marxism seeks the abolition of the family unit, including patriarchy. He himself mentioned the word patriarchy, by the way. He mentioned it in the, where is it? In case someone says, no, he didn't. I'll say, well, okay, I'll show you. Where is it? Family. Right. Okay. So it is in the first one in his book, The German Ideology, the first paragraph. The social structure is therefore limited to an extension of the family, patriarchal family chieftains, below them the members of the tribe, and finally slaves, and so on and so forth. So he mentions patriarchy. So if you want to be against the patriarchy, Karl Marx agrees. Islam obviously mandates that the families that males are responsible for their family members. There's responsibility, and I'm not going to give you narrations and Quranic verses today. I'm going to give that tomorrow, because tomorrow is all about feminism. So that's going to be an especially spicy day. Islam allows wage labor contracts. So basically, in Islam, you can employ people for wages. Of course, the Prophet Muhammad said, if any of you hires a worker, he has to inform him of his wage. That's the exploitation of surplus value of the worker. Karl Marx would not approve. Islam permits the wealthy to be wealthy, right? You can be wealthy in Islam and have lots of property beyond your needs, and the Quran even talks about, that Allah gives to different people different things, different amounts, different stations, and to try you in your responsibility. So if more is given to you, then you're more accountable to God for what you did with that wealth. Marxism demands class abolition. They can't be wealthy in Marxism. In Islam, you can be wealthy, and no problem with that. Now, many Marxist Muslims will say, but the zakah tax, it's a wealth tax, right? It's not an income tax. Wealth tax, so every year, if you have an amount of money or property above a certain value, you must pay 2.5% of that in perpetuity while you have that amount of money or that amount of property. It doesn't matter, you only pay tax once in the West, you get income tax. You pay tax once, you don't pay it anymore, right? In Islam, if you're above a certain amount, you have to pay every year 2.5%. So isn't that that's Marxism? Islam agrees with Marxism. Some Marxist Muslims told me on Twitter, and I simply say no. The percentage of Marxist zakah isn't 2.5%; it's 100%. Basically, yeah. You take all the private property of the wealthy and surplus personal property, and you distribute it according to need, right? So it's not Marxist. And remember, about when I was talking about liberalism, many Muslims will take some aspects of Islam that seem similar to a particular ideology and then generalize and say, oh, Islam must be liberal, Islam must be conservative, Islam must be Marxist, okay? Because they take some slight similarity. Oh, a wealth tax, it must mean that Islam is Marxist now. That's foolish and naive, and unfortunately is obviously people need to investigate truly what Marx is really calling to before they jump on board onto his ship. And finally, Marxism holds a theory, the labor theory of value, which is this bottle is only worth as much as the amount of labor required to make it. Okay? So if it took 2 hours to make it, then it's got 2 hours worth of value, so to speak, of a single person. If it takes 10 hours to make it, then it's 10 hours of value. Okay, that's how they argue. Karl Marx didn't come up with that. He stole that from Adam Smith because the labor theory of value was popular back then. So he didn't invent it. He just stole it, and he just assumed it was the case, and he took it. But that's false, because if I'm walking down on a garden path, shall we say, and I see a diamond in the rough, and I pick it up and I polish it and I clear it, it's clearly worth more than the time it took for me to find it, basically, right? To put it simply. Anyway, so I'll leave it here. The lecture was meant to be about also including neo-Marxism. However, I've only given you a little taste of neo-Marxism in that the neo-Marxists would realize that Karl Marx either was wrong about things, wow, he was wrong about stuff, or they will reinterpret his ideas to explain why his predictions failed. He believed that history is inevitably going to lead to communism, and that the most advanced capitalist state is the next candidate to jump to the next progression of human history and become a socialist state. He said it was inevitable. It was like physics. It was inevitably going to happen. So the most advanced capitalist state was England, and he thought England was going to be the next place of revolution by the workers. Guess what happened? It didn't happen like that. A more backward technological state like Russia experienced revolutions, and it became Marxist or communist, although you can arguably say that Lenin realized he couldn't implement it fully, and so he adjusted it. But anyway, it's a different discussion. So then when the neo-Marxists realized that Marx was wrong, and he also realized that he predicted that the workers would be continuing exploited and become more and more exploited over time, their wages would keep going down, and the profits would keep going up of the rich class, which didn't happen. When those things didn't happen, many Marxist thinkers went back to, they said, oh, you know what, Karl Marx was just wrong, and he was actually, he's completely wrong, let's just leave Marxism. No, they didn't say that, because obviously that would be too easy. No, they just said, no, maybe we have to rethink his ideas and adjust them to explain why the working class didn't rise up against the capitalist oppressors. Surely they see they're being oppressed. Why are they not rising up? Right? And that would lead neo-Marxists to develop ideas such as hegemony or cultural hegemony, and to believe that the ruling ideology, yes, it is produced by the economic system, but it has a life of its own, and it defends itself and reproduces itself. So it's now kind of detached from the economic system. It's like now it's being created by it. It lives by a separate existence, and maintains itself and by delusions in creating cultural products that continue the delusion, and anything that the Western governments do, that the capitalist governments do, like give workers rights, give working men the vote, which was also an issue. They didn't have the vote before that, and then finally women the vote. How do you explain that? Because Karl Marx predicted that wouldn't be the case. So that would be hard to explain from a Marxist basis. Why would the ruling classes do the very opposite of what you said? They will give the opportunity for the poorer people to have more power and influence. How do you explain that? Well, instead of viewing that as a refutation of Marxism, they adjusted it. Oh, no. That's what they want you to think, the bourgeois. It's all part of the plan. But you're even more enslaved because you think you're not enslaved, right? That's how they would argue it, right? So, let's just say if you as an organization do something to help a minority because you view that, okay, this minority has not been getting enough representation, or there's been oppression against a minority, or what have you, so we're going to do something to make sure that our organization is more inclusive, or make sure that there's no prejudices. That will be interpreted by neo-Marxists as, oh, that's what you want us to think, but deep down you want to entrench your position of supremacy even more. So neo-Marxists are very suspicious people, and everything you do, including nothing, will be taken down and used against you in a neo-Marxist court. Right? There is no way to please the neo-Marxists, because they have to explain why Marxism is still right by producing a conspiracy theory. Now, I'm not going to go into the details, because there's the Frankfurt School, and there's Herbert Marcuse, and then there's the postmodernists who would basically apostate from neo-Marxism and Marxism completely, and they'll simply say that there is no such thing as any worldview, whether it's Marxism, capitalism, Islam, Christianity, no worldview we can know for certain. Why are we trying to apply one particular one? Why don't we just let people just live without meta-narratives, or without narratives? They call it narratives now. We will discuss those things in two specific applications of neo-Marxism, in gender and in race. So tomorrow we'll see neo-Marxism being applied in gender, feminism, or current day feminism, and on Thursday we'll see neo-Marxism being applied in race, otherwise known as critical race theory. Right? And as I said, some people who defend critical race theory say, oh, how dare you call it neo-Marxist? And I say, well, could you just read Kimberly Crenshaw's work? She herself describes it that it derived from neo-Marxist thinkers like Gramsci and others, which we'll discuss. So anyone who knows these ideas knows that, it's neo-Marxist, so what, they'll say. So that in a nutshell is the presentation. So barakallahu feekum, thank you for your patience listening to a topic that usually requires a few semesters to teach at university. I've horribly summarized it, and I've left obviously a lot of bits out that I thought irrelevant, but inshallah you have a basic idea and you are able to respond to it from an Islamic perspective, saying, well, you know what, it disagrees with Islam on a whole number of points, so Islam clearly does not fit into Marxism. So, barakallahu feekum, I look forward to your contentions and questions. Okay, so I've said a lot of stuff. I tried to give you lots of quotations and things on the screen to kind of demonstrate what I'm saying is not just me inventing it or misunderstanding it or what have you. But if you think I've said anything that you disagree with, either that I've misrepresented Karl Marx's ideas, or I misrepresent neo-Marxism. Now, I haven't mentioned any evidences for neo-Marxism just yet, so then I'll say put a pause on that and come tomorrow and after tomorrow, where I'll be mentioning the evidences and the quotations of all these neo-Marxist thinkers, and so on and so forth, so you can see for yourself. But only on the Marxism section, if I've misrepresented Karl Marx in any way, shape or form, please go ahead. If you think that it somehow does agree with Islam, you are welcome. Even though I made some kind of some comments of a derogation nature against people that might believe it, but maybe I'm ignorant. Perhaps I don't know something that you might know, and you can educate me on this. And so that's why I'd like people to be able to speak and feel that they can speak without being judged. And of course, and maybe you sincerely thought there was a compatibility, but you didn't know these other issues, and maybe you want to explore these other issues. Maybe because Karl Marx wrote a lot of books, right? A lot of writings were published. So I know that most youngsters who are Marxists have probably not read all of them. So no judgment on you as to your choices. As I said, if I went to university and I had not encountered Islamic political fiqh and ideas and thoughts, I too would have jumped into one of these boats, the first boat that presented itself, because that's what most people do. And that's what most people are most likely to do. And as I said, Marxism is quite persuasive. The hook aspect of it, the thing that hooks you into it, is very persuasive. Imagine a society where all you have to do is you just work because you want to work. You only work like 3-4 hours a day, and it's whatever you want to do, basically, right? So. And everyone's working for the pleasure and the greater good of humanity and so on and so forth. That sounds all nice and interesting and lovey-dovey, but in practice, humans weren't so easy to be motivated for a greater good in derogation of them and their family. And of course, the Soviet Union had to find very creative ways of motivating people to when if you do the bare minimum in your job, the bare absolute minimum, or you excel in your job and you get paid the same wage regardless, it's not going to incentivize you to improve, is it? So, anyway, brother, over there, you go first then.
I don't think it's more to do with Marx, but just your comment about colonialism.
Yes.
So you said that most of the well-educated sort of liberals are just children of colonialism in that sense, where
in the Muslim world, yes,
they're against the colonialism that took place in their home countries, but
yep.
then afterwards they still espouse colonial or Western mindsets. What I sort of don't understand is you can have a criticism of colonialism as the force, but you can also see the benefits of Western values, and certainly your religion has changed quite a bit as well since the beginning. So then, don't you think that religion itself is a evolving force in the lives of people? And so therefore, ideas can be influenced, and you can take different ideas and you can apply them to your current situation to help us better. To help us have a better life.
Okay. Did everyone hear that? Roughly? Yeah, okay. All right. So good contention. So let's get into it. When people complain about colonialism, they don't just say, we hate that we were invaded by people with guns and cannons and what have you. They say more than that, generally speaking. They'll say that they impose their culture on us, is the issue they have, generally speaking, if you agree with me on that. Okay. But their culture was Western values, was the Western ideas, and they came specifying that they were there to spread those values and ideas, because the West thought that humanity was inevitably going to reach a liberal mindset and idea. Again, they're taking Hegel's idea that there's a progression of thought into a rational future for all, and so. If there were cultures and peoples who were not so far intellectually advanced, they hadn't yet discovered these values, the question is that there was a debate amongst liberals as to what to do. Now, if the people are willing, but there's like a power structure in that society that's not letting those people have access to those values, then you need to go into that society and remove the power structure and give the people what they deserve, because from a liberal's perspective, all human beings are individuals and everyone deserves to live under liberalism. It's their God-given, their whatever, some universe-given right, God-given right. Oh, if you're John Locke, it is a God-given right. So then the people in these countries, they have an entitlement to liberalism. It is an obligation for them to live on, because liberalism is justice. So then if their ruling system is not allowing that, is being unjust, then isn't it your duty to defend your fellow human beings against injustice, right? So we should get on a boat and conquer them and deliver them justice, and then surely they will welcome you. And that's basically the idea of colonialism. It was justified by quite a few liberals, in fact, John Stuart Mill being one of them, who also had a colonial interest in East India Company. But anyway, but of course it's about enlightening the masses, of course. So they would make the argument. Now then, to those people who decry colonialism because they say it's the imposition of one culture on another, that's their reason why they colonize it. They're against colonization. I say, okay, but then why are you still adopting those cultural values then? Why are you a product of it? Why are you embracing it? If you truly want to reverse colonialism, go back to the values that existed in that land before the West came there. Then I would take you seriously. Okay? Until then, it's just lip service, because you're being fashionable. Oh, I hate colonialism, yes, of course. Well, all right, great, but you are the child of colonialism, and you celebrate it. You know? And that's the issue. That's the issue. So choose, right? Do you hate it? Then be consistent. If you love it, then fine. Then fine as in, at least you're being consistent.
But the nature of the exchange of ideas is, in and of itself, is that you're allowed to pick and choose what works and what doesn't work. All I'm saying is that I think a blanket statement such as your problem with the quote-unquote children of colonialism is that they are becoming the new force for liberal values. I'm just saying that. No,
that wasn't my problem. I didn't say that. I'm very precise with my words. Learned by bad experience. You always be very accurate, clear. Never say beyond your meaning. And my meaning was that those who say I'm against colonialism because colonialism is the imposition of values by a foreign power, is giving values that are not indigenous to that land and putting those values in that land. Okay, if that's your basis, why are you contradicting yourself by gleefully adopting those values and using them and so on and so forth? That was my point.
I mean, you can. Sorry,
It's okay.
I mean, we can fundamentally see that there are good ideas in Western liberalism.
I'm not talking about good or bad ideas. That wasn't my discussion. I'm not talking about good or bad ideas. I'm simply saying that if that's your basis, don't contradict your basis. Simply, I'm a demand for consistency. That's all I'm arguing, is that be consistent in your arguments. I've been saying that for years and years and years. That in essence, you can summarize all my refutations of people by saying be consistent, right? That's all I'm saying. Be consistent. Don't say you're against colonialism then. If you don't say it, then I won't, because you say it's the imposition of a foreign culture on your people. Fine. But then don't contradict yourself and then revel in the values that were brought to your lands and so on and so forth. Now, as for better or worse values, look, Islam does not have an issue with people being influenced by other people in of itself, okay? In the Quran, the word for a gold coin is what? Dinar, right? Does anyone know the Arabic root, the triliteral root in the Arabic language where dinar comes from? The origin of it? Sorry? Danara. You're just saying the consonants. It doesn't have one. Do you know why? Because it's not originally an Arabic word. It's a Roman word, a Latin word from denarius. Yeah, that became popularized. And look, the Quran's using what? The Quran's using a colonial word, colonial term of a foreign currency? No, because it just means gold coin now. You know, the Arabic language, all languages are formed by multiple, peoples moving around and bringing words and changing words. The Arabic language, like every other language, it has many loan words that then suddenly just become part of DNA. They're like retroviruses. They become part of the DNA of the language and they blend in. But you can tell they're not from an earlier form of that language because they don't have a triliteral root. Semitic languages have triliteral roots. They have like 3 letters that they derive from. So the Quran has no problem with borrowing objects, certain ideas, like I said yesterday that the Muslims borrowed the Persian accounting system, the Diwan system, because it was superior to manage a large landmass. You know, so it works. So let's use it because it's not attached to values of good and bad. So as Muslims, we can take anything as long as it's not attached to a value of good and bad. But if it attaches to a value of what is good, what is bad, we take it only from revelation. Right? We take it from the creator of the universe. But about how to do things, or objects, or how to make certain objects, or how to treat people with medicine, things about the physical world, knowledge about the physical world, methodologies that study the physical world that produce results, take it all. Take it all from everybody. But the Arabs took Indian numerals, you know. No one said, oh, that's not Arabic, so we're not going to take that. No, they took it in. And then it became part of the. Even took. Some people say the Indian numeral system was actually taken by the Arabs. So the whole numeral system is actually Indian numeral system. But regardless, it doesn't make a difference. Okay, it's useful. We use it. What's the problem? Yeah. So take that. But ideas of good and bad. Well, good and bad has no meaning except with relative to human purpose, and human purpose determined by the Creator. You know. So. Like this mouse has a purpose. The purpose of this mouse is to obviously like move things on a screen and to manipulate your computer. If this mouse was broken, didn't work, is it a good or bad mouse? It's a bad mouse. Why is it bad?
Because it's not working according to its purpose.
Exactly. It's not working according to its purpose. So only by knowing what human purpose is can we determine good and bad. And of course, who gave us purpose? The Creator. Everything else is just the speculations of human beings that have zero weight. Okay? Does that answer my point? Okay, good. Any other contentions? Things you dislike about me? You might say, Abdullah, I have a contention. I don't like your waistcoat. Just use a suit next time. I'm trying it out, okay? So do tell me. Anyway, sister in the front.
Yeah, I just have a question. Maybe I arrived late and I missed this part, but you made the comment that equality kind of stems from capitalism as opposed to Marxism, and it seems like from this scheme that Marxism stems from the concept of equality. So if you can just...
Okay, so the sister asked makes a very interesting point. She said she came in, not from the very beginning, but she came in midway. She wanted me to explain, did I cover this before? So, Karl Marx didn't use the term equality because he felt that the term equality comes from capitalism. It's a product of the previous system, because liberals believe in equality, but liberals are produced by capitalism. So that idea is attached to the previous economic system that he doesn't like, and he wants to make a new economic system, a new system for society. So he doesn't believe in equality because equality he views to be the principle that was concocted by capitalists. Capitalists is just basically liberal economists, if you were to put it crudely. So that's why he was against the idea of equality as an idea. Because he also didn't like the idea of a principle that doesn't relate to matter. Like, give me something material to work with. Don't just give me airy-fairy ideals. Justice, equality, rights. It's like, no. I want material explanations. I want material things. You know, where is justice in the universe? You know. As Terry Pratchett said via one of his characters, if you were to grind up all the atoms in the universe and see what's inside, you won't find justice or rights or any of this stuff within it, right? It doesn't exist. These are immaterial things, right? So that's why Karl Marx rejects it. But the stream of thought that he inhabits, that stream of thought, came from the idea of equality. But Karl Marx would have no problem with it, because he simply says that human thoughts evolve over time because they represent evolving technology. They're the same. They come from evolving technology. And so, of course, his predecessors believe in equality, but he is now the new evolved intellectual with new ideas based on the new means of production that are available, the new technology that's available. And so we don't need to care about equality anymore. We'll just care about abolition of classes. We will replace equality with something more clear-cut, the abolition of classes. And a class is explained as those who own private property capital. So we abolish capital being owned privately, and then you have no class struggle anymore, no fighting anymore. So he doesn't need to use equality. He doesn't say, I want to create an equal future. He doesn't care about that, about using the word equality or even citing it. And for him, it's irrelevant. He gives you, in his mind, a scientific concept instead. It's not scientific, but that's what he likes to call it. Equality is not a scientific word, is it? Yeah? But he gives you the abolition of capital and the abolition of classes as the scientific definition now of what he wants to achieve. Very clear cut in his mind. Does that make sense? Or I probably made you more confused now. Yeah.
I'm just not sure how equality comes from capitalism, because I don't think capitalism cares about making people equal, right? I mean, economically.
Okay, so the sister says she doesn't feel that equality comes from capitalism because capitalism doesn't care about equality, about making people equal economically. Okay, so a liberal or a capitalist, because they're both the same thing, they would say that they do. Of course they do, but they say that equality in what? So they'll say equality under the law. That's the equality they care about. Everyone gets treated the same under the law. No, you're a different kind of human, so you get less rights than another kind of human. That they don't believe in. They say everyone must be treated as exactly equal under the law. But that doesn't mean now that you have to have the same amount of money in your pocket. You have to have the same credit cards and the same, bank balance and so on and so forth. No. Right? Whereas a socialist would say that you need to be equal in wealth for everyone to be truly free, and a Marxist would say would say why are you obsessed with the word equality? Yeah, let's give you a more concrete, better word that is a scientific version of equality, right? The scientific version of it, which is no one owns no one owns capital, and there is no classes. There you go. It's a scientific version of equality. He's saying this old definition you use is from the liberals' time, the time that should be in our past now. We want to make it into the past. We want to go into a future of scientific terms based on his materialism. Does that make a bit more sense? As I said, a lot of this is trying to bend your head around Karl Marx's arguments, right? Because I said, usually this requires a course of quite a few sessions to learn just on one of these concepts. What does he mean by alienation? What does he mean by historical materialism? You'll do one session with a lecture on one of those topics, just one, right? So I've kind of condensed it into this and tried to make it as understandable as possible. But all I wanted to tell you is just so you can see how he's a very consistent materialist, but materialism is not consistent with observable reality, right? So, any other contentions? Okay, I know, usually I say there's a Q&A, so we have questions and answers, but I give privilege to people who disagree with me first, and then we go for Q&A. All right. So, gentleman in the back.
Wasn't a contention, it was just a question. This isn't related to Marxism and Islam, Marxism and the Arab and Muslim world. I noticed, historically speaking, a lot of communists, socialists, and Marxists support Palestine. And to this day, the Communist Party of Canada is the only party who actually has a pro-Palestinian stance that I know of.
Yep.
Is this part of their hook to attract the oppressed, or is there some deeper meanings that I don't know about?
Okay, so the gentleman asked a very good question, which is why are Marxists and many socialists supporters of the Palestinian cause? Is this a cynical attempt by them to recruit more pawns for their war against the bourgeois, right? In a way, there might be a partial reason in them, certainly so, and I say that because they mention it, right? They in their literature they mention this, so I'm not just speculating here. But what they would see is they would say that so this stems from their condemnation of imperialism. Now, imperialism is what they would call they call that capitalism's foreign policy. And like any falsehood, there's a degree of truth to the falsehood. So what they say has a degree of truth. But for them, they don't believe that the capitalists or liberals want to spread their ideology because they want everyone's betterment. They want to make money. And they just pretend it's for everyone's betterment. They pretend that they're spreading civilization by their Western values. But really, they just want to exploit you. That's how the Marxists would explain it. But as I said, many liberals who were pro-colonialists were philosophers, and like John Stuart Mill and others, and they honestly thought they were doing good, arguably so. They thought they were rescuing human beings around the world who just weren't fortunate enough to live under the justice of liberalism. And they believe that if you're, you know it today as, they call it a very insultingly universal term because it implies that no one else believes in it, human rights. That's how you know it today. As is, they say, we're here to spread human rights are universal. And to which I say, sorry, whose definition of human rights? And what, so no one else believes in human rights, just you guys? Oh, well, they deny, in this country they deny this or they deny that and so on, or they don't give you the right to drink alcohol or to publicly declare what happens in your own home in the privacy of your own bed. It's like, I'm sorry, is that a right? I mean, a right according to, so they will say that they're just spreading universal rights, okay? And they debate amongst themselves, even to this day. They call it liberal interventionism, or humanitarian interventionism, to make it even more palatable, about helping the people in these countries who are under regimes and religions and cultures that don't recognize universal human rights. Okay? Now, many of these human rights activists, which are basically the duat, the callers to liberalism, but they call themselves obviously just human rights advocates or activists, because it obviously sounds too obvious to say we're liberal activists, although some might even admit that. Today, some argue, many liberals in certain countries argue for Western intervention. There are many Iranians who argue that they want the West to go in and conquer Iran and liberate it because the people there are suffering. And they don't necessarily have an economic incentive in mind, right? But the Marxists would say, no, it's just all for economics, just for economics, because that's how they view the world, that's how they have to view the world. So now going back, so the Marxist views liberal expansionism, the spreading of liberal ideology, as simply a means of exploiting the proletariat in other countries. So the bourgeois in this country don't just control the proletariat in this country, but they can make even more money controlling the proletariat in other countries and their resources. So Marxists are against imperialism for that reason. And hence many Muslims find common cause with them. They think, oh, well, joined by, it's great, our demonstration is being bulked up by a bunch of people wearing black berets and red stars. Okay, we'll ask any questions, all welcome. But what that leads to is then many Muslims, because many Muslims think, oh, these are our allies now, like either they say, let's not offend them by refuting socialism or Marxism or what have you. And when these socialists go to Muslims, they know that Muslims will not accept that religion is just inverted consciousness. So they say, look, you don't need to think about that part of Karl Marx. You don't need to adopt that. Just adopt Karl Marx's economic vision is sufficient for us. Isn't it? It's about justice, it's about feeding the poor. Why do you hate the poor? Yeah. So if you don't, then you have to follow us. Yeah. Marxists and neo-Marxists would use that kind of argument all the time. It's like, if you oppose us Marxists, it's because you hate the poor and you support the bourgeois. If you don't like our version of feminism, it's because you hate women. And if you don't like our neo-Marxist framework for understanding race relations in America and the West, it's because you are secretly a racist. Right? That's their defense mechanism, basically, as to how they would address it. They use it all the time. Anyway, so that'd be my point to how I answer it. The Palestinian cause for the Marxists is anti-imperialist because they view Israel as an imperialist, because it involved Western influence. That the British conquered Palestine, and they just installed the socialists would say they installed a Western compliant nation, a capitalist nation, a capitalist state there. So that's why they would have issues. But do you know what the irony is? That massive irony. Does anyone know who the first Zionists were? The political Zionists, that was, because there's other different kinds, but political Zionists. Does anyone know who they were?
Atheists.
Yes. And in his Zionist Congress, who was the majority of his Zionist Congress? David Ben-Gurion. What was his politics about? What was his politics? Was he left-wing, right-wing?
Labor.
Huh?
Left, right, labor.
He's a socialist, right? The majority of the early political Zionists were all socialists. Why? Well, because what happened to what happened to the Jewish community living in the West when they were facing persecution, the motivation for them to be disillusioned with the West, to be disillusioned with liberalism in many cases, led many of them to become Marxist, become socialist, because that was counter the existing culture. And of course, as some Muslims, they read the prophecy by the Prophet Muhammad that said that Muslims will follow the same mistakes as the people of previous revelations, Christians and Jews. So some Muslims believe in that prophecy so much that they will consciously replicate it by being socialist and Marxist too. If the Jews are going to do it, the Christians are going to do it, we're going to do it too. And they jumped into the socialist bandwagon, and eventually, just like Jewish socialists and like many Christian socialists, they become atheists. So David Ben-Gurion was an atheist. Didn't believe in the Torah, doesn't believe in Messiah is going to come and all this. None of that stuff. Didn't care about that stuff. Simply, they put it like this. They needed a state. They couldn't trust non-Jews to give rights to Jewish people, because everywhere Jews were, they were mistreated or they faced racism in some shape or form. Okay, so a nationalist argument. But they said that the only way Jews can truly realize socialism is if they have their state, and then they can decide the political system of that state, and then they can live under a socialist state. Right? So socialism was a key motivator of the first Zionists. Right? Religious Zionists only came about after the Six-Day War, when they thought, this Israeli state which we fought is cursed by God, because God, we believe God says that only we must wait for the Messiah, the Messiah, to come, and then we will unite the Jews. We must wait for the Mahdi to come. Oh, sorry, the Messiah to come before we do anything. And why does that sound familiar? They weren't involved. For the most, there was some, but they weren't mostly involved in caring about Israel as a government or a state, or migrating there to support it, until the Six-Day War, when it was until obviously the Holocaust happened as well, which did motivate people to change their minds, but where some had to do it by necessity. But in the Six-Day War, it seemed to kind of give some kind of evidence that there was divine approval over Israel. Look, it defeated all these Arab nations by, fighting them first. Yeah, but it seemed to be, like God must be supporting Israel, therefore we must revise our religious opinions about it. So religious Jews only got more interested in Israel after the Six-Day War. Right, but before that, it was really only atheists and socialists, but with the majority of Ashkenazim Jews from European backgrounds, basically. So, irony of ironies: socialism created Israel, right? Well, and a bit of nationalism too. Okay, contention, sir. Go ahead.
Well, just to maybe continue on with what you were just saying there. And my perspective is totally Western biased. I'll acknowledge that.
That's right. No one's perfect.
So wouldn't you say that if you were a European Jew and you went through the Holocaust and what the Nazis did and everything, and you saw what maybe before the United States became involved in World War II, you saw Russian resistance against the Nazis as, is that a possible view as to why a Jewish person would become sympathetic to socialism as well, because they saw what Russians were trying to, and they did liberate. They beat the United States to liberate Berlin and to end the war. So, is there that? interpretation too, and also, so I wanted to ask beyond that. So if Israel was founded by socialists, then how is the current politics in Israel so, like your political options to vote in Israel right now is like a right-wing party or a very right-wing party?
Yeah.
So, like what, I guess I need a more flushed out version of.
Well, I'll say, okay. So there are nuances in history. So the early socialist, political Zionists, the majority of them were socialists. This is way before the Holocaust happens, right? So we're talking turn of the 20th century. So from the 19th to 20th century, this is when they're operating this kind of age or this kind of epoch. So there's no Holocaust happening by that point in time, but there was discrimination against Jews. There was the Dreyfus affair, which was in France, where a loyal Jewish officer was accused of giving military secrets to the Germans prior to World War I, but because France and Germany always had a bit of beef with each other, and so and he was innocent, but the fact that they just wanted to pin someone in someone. And they pinned on him. Of course, there's evidence that came on later of that they suggested it was a non-Jewish German that was doing, a non-Jewish French officer that was doing it, but they didn't care. They wanted just to blame the Jewish officer. So there was many instances where Jews in the West were reminded that they weren't welcome, or they weren't going to be just treated as equal citizens, or just considered to be citizens of the country they're in. But also the part of the Jewish or world Jewry that was more comfortable with their society was many Jews in America, or not just America, probably Canada too, because it's more Anglo-Saxon liberal. There's less interference in their religious life and so on and so forth. And but they might still face kind of social racism and racism on a social level from people around them. So that was. Many Jews was disillusioned with Western liberalism after the Enlightenment emancipation of Jews, because before the Enlightenment, Jews were not given the full rights under Christian governments, but under Enlightenment they were given emancipation, they were given full rights and so on and so forth. But they became disillusioned due to their continued discrimination and mistreatment after the emancipation of Jews, and so many became disillusioned, and they adopted a rival ideology to liberalism, which is socialism. Or Marxism. I mean, Karl Marx himself was Jewish, right? People don't realize this, yeah? Because socialism was viewed to be a counterculture, a counter ideology to liberalism. Of course, Karl Marx was clever enough to make a more specific, a grandiose worldview based on materialism and so on and so forth, which all the socialists hadn't done up to that point. Anyway, so that's why you need to explain why those Jews became socialists 50, 60 years before the Holocaust happened. So that's why we have to go back to the more earlier historical circumstances. But yes, as to your second, you made a second point. Sorry, it just eluded me. Please remind me.
If Jews adopted socialism so much, I guess I was using the foundation of the state of Israel after World War II as a kind of...
Oh, why they're right-wing now? That was it. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, now I remember now. Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, when you have states that have multi-party systems or allow multi-party systems, and when socialists were creating the state of Israel, socialism is a bit of a spectrum. And they differ as to how to establish a more pure socialist state and what they have to work with. So socialists might aim for, you could say, an Ikhwani type system, for those Muslims who know about the Ikhwan, where they say, okay, we'll create a state that initially, its initial conditions are not full socialist, but have many socialist characteristics with welfare programs and so on and so forth that match socialism. They had kibbutz, communes, right, in Palestine, where they shared common property. They tried it on smaller scale experiments, which still exist in occupied Palestine. So they had it, but then of course maintaining a socialist state or progressing towards it, they were hoping they were going to progress towards it by gradations gradually. But of course, as happens with socialism, is that they tend to be great disappointments in achieving their goals. The UK Labour Party was meant to be a socialist party, and now it espouses close to what they call neoliberal capitalist ideas and policies, right? Not so socialist anymore. Basically, right? Jeremy Corbyn. Anyone else remember Jeremy Corbyn? It was like there were, who, by the way, I actually debated once. Right? No one knows about it. I kept it hidden while he was campaigning because I thought that the Western media would then pick up on it and then say, oh, you know, Jeremy Corbyn on panel with Islamists or extremists, whatever, because obviously that's how they view Muslims. So I didn't want to get involved. So I just kind of like, actually, I didn't do anything. No one noticed it. I'm not going to publicize it, right? I'm not going to publicize it, and because they want to undermine him, and that would assume that I'm already a persona non grata, and I didn't want that. But I debated him on secularism, actually, quite interestingly. It wasn't a one-on-one; it was a panel. But it is on my YouTube channel. Sorry, my organisation YouTube channel, the Muslim Debate Initiative. You can see it there. I'll let you find it if you can. Right. This is before he was famous, so I didn't know he was just some guy from Parliament. So I was debating. Anyway, he represents old guard socialism of the Labour Party, but now obviously he got undermined and kind of evicted from Labour Party mainstream. The Labour Party is embraced full, well, not fully neoliberal, but basically more centre-right or close to centre-right policies. Although before them there was Tony Blair, who again moved towards more conservative ideas. Although the Labour Party did have more social welfare programs at that time, but now they're less social than they were before. Right? It's much more less social. Should we say socialist? So things change over time in multi-party systems, starting with liberalism as the basis, and so. In the Israeli government, of course, with multi-party system, you're going to have the right wing who were there since 1920s, 1930s. The Zhabotinsky kind of faction, the Haganah, the Stern Gang, and there was these kind of terrorist movements which were right wing amongst the pre-independence Israeli forces. And these individuals just kind of evolved into that stream of thinking, evolved into the modern right wing, the Likud party in Israel now. So they were always there in a sense, because socialists are not going to kill right wingers amongst them, conservatives or ultranationalists amongst them. But they just thought that you can have open, fair elections because don't worry, the people will always vote for socialism. But that doesn't always happen, of course, obviously, and so. Over time, it's because of the change of the Israeli public's opinions, they've just adopted more ultra-protectionist policies, not just protectionist in terms of economics, but rather protection in terms of territorial protection. Nationalism has been ramped up in response to increasing pressure to liberate the Palestinians who are given a kind of non-citizen status, or right in between citizen status or statelessness in the West Bank and Gaza and so on and so forth. So that's a more fuller explanation, of course. But yeah, anyway, I did a course, a 10-week course on Palestinian advocacy. So if anyone wants to see more details of that, you can. I did it for the Quran Institute, so you can just check it out. Inshallah, I covered that more in detail. Okay, so before we go to question and answer, any more contentions? Anyone disagree with me on anything at all? No? Okay. Now we can begin the questions and answers session. Okay. Might I say, I just want to reiterate for the sake of obviously this week. Of course, every day from now on it will get spicy and spicy because people are we're going to get to more specific topics which people are invested in. You know, so feminism is a topic which it's not just about sisters, but also brothers which now think everything that women say is feminist, and that's obviously a problem. And of course, there are then women who think that feminism is the only way they can get their rights, and Muslim women who think that feminism doesn't contradict Islam because they can choose to define it any way they want. Okay, so there's a lot more people invested with the word feminism or connected to that term, even though they have different ideas about what it means. And hence, tomorrow's lecture is going to be more spicy, I suppose, because I'm going to probably step on people's toes inadvertently, unintentionally. And then, of course, on Thursday, critical race theory, where people are going to come in. I'm going to place a bet. If anyone who does come in, someone's going to say, "How can you, a white person, talk about critical race theory, or a white passing person, that was it, or a white adjacent person talk about it?" So I'm going to place a bet. At least maybe I might get one person saying that, and hence a spicy topic, basically. But the spiciest of all the spicy topics will be this mysterious session on Friday, the grand finale, which I invite you all to attend. You will remember it. Let's just say I would like to say that your university days will be marked by it, but you will remember it, basically. Let's just put it like that. So that's an enticement for you to come, if you can, to the Friday one. It will involve all the things we've talked about. It all gets brought together, but there's a few extra bits that I won't say, special ingredients to that lecture, which we will save for the Friday. So do come. Even if you miss all the rest of it, don't miss them. But if you do, at least come to the Friday one. Anyway, tell your friends, uncles, aunties, mothers, fathers, whatever, to come along. Okay, any other questions you'd like to raise? I do apologize that I've condensed a lot of Marxism stuff, and you probably won't remember all of it because... So at least remember the points where Islam and Marxism contradict each other, because those should be clear points as it is anyway. That we don't believe that you abolish the wealthy. We believe in private property as defined by Marxism, owning land, owning factories. We believe in wages can be paid for labor. The Prophet Muhammad himself permitted it. So how can Marxists prohibit something that we believe that the Prophet of the Creator of the universe relayed to us that God himself had permitted? You understand? So, okay, any other questions, contentions, or do you want elaborations of what I've mentioned, clarifications about what I've mentioned about Karl Marx? No? Yes, you understand it? Okay, you brother?
I just want to kind of get your opinion on Alexander Dugin.
So Alexander
Dugin.
Dugin, okay, yeah.
So, because he's coming across as like presenting a fourth. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this philosophy, because he's presenting the fourth political theory. I just want to kind of get your opinion. Is that just like a bluff? Is it just like...
He's not the first person to try to present an alternative to the dichotomy between liberalism and Marxism. There was a movement of people, of social democrats called the Third Way as well, trying to present a middle path between these two. He didn't invent it, that kind of attempt to transcend both, but it's really just a mix or hybrid of a few socialist ideas mixed with a few liberal ideas, and hence they're called now social democrats, or where they attempt to improve the lives of the proletariat, of the working classes, by through the electoral system, by gradations, but not to ever reach a state whereby no one owns the means of production anymore and that kind of stuff. That's a bit pie in the sky, because they realize that you do need profit incentive, you need entrepreneurs to be dynamic in the system. So they are socialists who realize that that you need entrepreneurship and you need capital to be owned privately, for things to work very well. But you need to make a comfortable life for those who are on the lower classes of the property ladder, so to speak. You need to provide for them to the point that they don't feel that they have to struggle to survive. So it's kind of that's already a hybrid. Social democracy is already a hybrid. What I've done with this diagram is the more right, well, the more left you go, although it's meant to be for right wing, but the more left you go, the more individualistic you are, the more right to right you go, the more societal you are, like the idea of like of realizing individualism via a community, right? So social democracy is more to the left in this diagram, although technically be more to the right in the wing system in the West of the political spectrum, because it's more towards liberalism. And social liberalism is more towards the left wing, or more towards, in this diagram, more the other side there. So I will order this diagram the right way tomorrow, so you can we get the wings correct and right. Okay. Does that make sense though? So yeah, people have done hybrids, the hybrid way, the hybrid third way, but it's just a mix match, a pastiche of both sides. Anyone have any questions, comments, or contentions? Did someone raise their hand there? No? Okay, you brother?
Clarification, if Marxism says that you cannot own private property and classes should be abolished,
Yeah.
but you're in a society where there is property, then to divide that property would mean you probably have to have certain people determining who needs what.
Yep.
So wouldn't that be creating a class itself?
Okay, so the brother asked a very good question. If you're going to redistribute wealth in a society where you want to abolish class structure, don't you need a privileged group of people who get to decide what goes where? Government, basically. Yes, you do, and it's called. And Karl Marx said that after capitalism, the next stage will be socialism, where you have a state that controls the means of production, the capital, and redistributes it via the state. But that's not the end stage. The end stage of humanity, the utopia, is the state will wither away. That's what he says. It will wither away, and you'll live as in a perfect commune of anarchism, basically. The state will just disappear. You won't need it anymore. It's like training wheels on your bike when you're a kid. The training wheels will come off, and you'll be able to ride by yourself now. So he views that socialism is just a stage, the next stage, but not the end stage. So that's how he would answer that. Of course, some socialists would simply say that's ridiculous. You need to have government, and you need to have government that ensures the distribution of wealth. You, sir.
Questions about Islam, should I ask them now or later on?
Concerning relevant to Marxism or economic system?
Not at all relevant, it's a personal question.
Well, if anyone doesn't have any other questions concerning this, do you want to hear it out? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Right. How do I do this as respectfully as possible as a non-Muslim?
Just say it, it's fine.
Okay.
Just say it.
So, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's marriages with Zainab and Rehana, or Safiya, sorry, not Rehana, how just the context behind those marriages are very concerning to me, and how, I just find it very concerning, the context and the background of those marriages, and like.
What in particular?
Well, I mean, Safiya's radiallahu anha's a capture as ghanima, and you know that after having her entire family massacred, she essentially marries the Prophet, and then with Zainab, it's essentially is that the Prophet sees her almost barely clothed, and then he essentially abolishes the entire system of adoption in order to get married to her. So those are like some things that just don't sit right with me in general.
Okay, so let's go through then Safiya first. So basically, Safiya's tribe is at war with the Muslim nascent community, and so in the war, the town gets conquered and so on and so forth. And you're kind of interpreting the actions or the mentality of people back then with what you think would happen under normal circumstances now, that people would be appalled or upset or what have you, whereas in the medieval world there was an expectation that, well, like okay, men look after women, men protect women. If your husband gets killed, basically, then you need to find a new husband. It's as simple as that. And you'd be surprised how in those circumstances, people accept a new husband, even from amongst the conquerors. It happened many times in the medieval world and classical world, and throughout history in many different cultures and civilizations. You imagine or you assume that every relationship back then was done out of love and romance, right? Or initially, like this kind of Hollywood type romance thing, whereas humans were much more pragmatic back then, right? And it was just, okay, love builds up with someone after marriage, in most cases, or sometimes it never does, but it was irrelevant. As long as the person is not going to kill you, and they can look after your children, then that's all you need, right? To survive and continue the family name and yada, yada, yada. Now, there's that. But there's also other reports where, so here's what happens. So, her husband gets killed, but she reveals that her husband actually, so the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu sees a bruise mark on her. Where'd you get that from? Her husband actually used to beat her, right? And so the Prophet Muhammad didn't say, okay, well, you're captured now in war, so you're mine now. He released her, right? And then she married him voluntarily, right? He didn't need to release her because under the rules of warfare, you get captured, your tribe fights not a tribe. The forfeit is basically then your tribe becomes captives, straight up like this. But he releases her. So I don't see anything contentious with that at all. She made a voluntary decision to marry someone when she was actually released, and she was under no obligation. And she also revealed that her husband's a wife beater, but I suppose that's just an additional point. Okay, as for the marriage to Zainab, so people who criticize the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu, obviously historians usually have encountered Christians who've done this, although Christians were the first critics of Islam because it was viewed as a rival to Christendom. Because in the West you can have adoption, and adoption in Western traditional culture is you take someone in and they become just like your blood relative, but they're not actually your blood relative. They're from a different gene pool, so to speak. They're not your cousin, they're not your son or your daughter. So the interpretation by people who want to view it negatively is they say, oh, he just changed the rules so he could get married to Zainab, adoption. But that's a very pretty big change just because you want to get married or something. You're changing a whole law for a society just for that. Doesn't really make sense. Or you could view it from quite simply that Zainab and the Prophet Muhammad wanted to marry each other, and then if you believe that the God exists, and you believe, and the Quran, that the Quran was revealed not all in one go, and that the laws were revealed not all in one go, but whenever there was a pertinent situation arise, then a ruling came for it to resolve it whichever way. So when this situation happened where the two people wanted to marry each other, but they couldn't, then the Creator of the universe reveals, and it's not a radical idea, that someone that you're not related to by blood, you can marry. Right? Not a radical idea, I don't think, right? And that was it. So it's as simple as that. So I don't feel there's anything controversial. Maybe it's against one's socialized tastes, to use a neo-Marxist term, right? In the society you've brought up with, they say, oh, but, we're going to consider that if you're adopted, that means that you're a blood relative, you're just like a blood relative, because we say so and we think so. It's like, well, yeah, but you're not really a blood relative, are you, genetically speaking? Like, what incest laws, aren't they there to, some people would argue they're there to prevent intermarriage within families of close genetic relation. Isn't that the point, right? So then if they're not related to you genetically, so, at least by one or two times anyway, because we're all related, we're all cousins in a way, then where's the issue then? That was it. Hope that makes sense.
Makes sense, but still not convinced. Thank you.
But why aren't you convinced if it makes sense to you? It makes sense, but you're not convinced. What do you think is... What obstacles do you find in yourself, do you think? That, like, is there an objection in a way, or do you just still find it just distasteful because it's not what you were brought up with, or?
Probably it's just because I was brought up with a certain culture, and in that culture, viewing an adopted child is akin to viewing them as a full-blooded relative. So then it just bothers me, I suppose.
But would you not concede that that feeling was just an arbitrary value that was simply taught to you, but has no authority beyond the fact that society around you held it?
It just doesn't sit right with my predisposition. That's what I would say. Maybe that predisposition is.
But is it a predisposition, or is it just a post-social disposition?
I'm not sure.
Well, predisposition implies that it was there from the very beginning of it's there, part of your nature almost. Whereas a socialized disposition is one that was inculcated to you by your environment, by society. I'll try and find. I'm going to give you an example. Maybe I'll give you an example of something. Of something that the West that is acceptable elsewhere, but the West has issues with. But then I usually put it all the way around, actually, because there's so many things are permitted in the West, which might be a bit crazy. Okay, do you find people marrying their cousins distasteful?
Yes.
You do. Why do you find that distasteful?
It's against my religion.
It's against your religion to marry your cousin?
Yes.
All right, but what about your second cousin?
My strand of religion where I'm from.
Okay. What about your second cousin? Twice removed.
Still against my religion.
Third cousin?
Still against my religion.
Fourth cousin?
Maybe that's allowed, I suppose.
What's the difference between a fourth cousin and fifth cousin?
Again, I'm not too sure. It's just a familial thing. It just feels a little distasteful, I suppose. That's all.
I know, but what is the difference between a fourth and fifth cousin?
I'm not too sure.
You do realize that when by saying fifth cousin, that will cover a very, very large area, by the way. Even fourth cousin, you say you just find distasteful. It will cover like cities, so on and so forth, or beyond, because anyone done ancestry DNA tests and things like that? By fourth, fifth cousin, it's pretty broad. It's massively broad. Do you know that geneticists have discovered that in the ancient world, in people living in towns and cities, by that point in time, it was normal to marry your cousin because everyone was pretty much your cousin in some way, to some degree of separation. And if you go, we're all cousins, if you believe in that we all come from a single pair of human beings. So, what up, cuz? Anyway, but as in North America say, but we're all cousins, right? So then we don't marry any other human being, because we share common parents. It's just pretty long ago, but we do share common ancestors. So do you think then that maybe that puts it into a different perspective?
Something to think about, I suppose.
Okay, good. But all I can never ask from anyone is to think. So that's good. Okay. Any other questions, contentions, arguments? You, sir?
I have a World War II themed question.
A World War II theme question. Oh, great. Okay.
It's actually kind of on the other side of the spectrum. So it has to do with fascism and Nazis. So during the war, I don't know how familiar you are with that party, but
with the
Nazi party and the military. But the SS.
I was going to say, oh yeah, I'm familiar with the Nazi party, and then someone's going to take the little clip, put it on TikTok. Abdullah is saying he's a bit too familiar with the Nazi party. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
So the SS created, I believe there was more than one unit, but there was a division made entirely of Bosnian Muslims.
Yeah.
And I believe they were volunteers. I don't think that division, there was a conscript regiment or a division, but this one was volunteer. But my question is, if you were Muslim, why, even if they just promised you your homeland, if they did win, why then would you contradict your entire religion to fight with that party or for that ideology?
Okay, so the gentleman asked a very good question. He said, why would Muslims, the Bosnian Muslims who joined a SS division or SS special unit, why would they fight for the Nazis if the Nazis are evil and the ideology of fascism is contrary to Islam, as well as specifically the Nazi Party's version of it is contrary to Islam? And I'll add another caveat, another point to that, that the Nazi ideology views the Arabs as Semites too, and also then inferior to the German peoples. So why would people, technically Bosnians, I suppose they would view them as not Semites, so I suppose that's not the case. But their fellow Muslim brothers would be viewed as inferior by their allies, the Germans. So why would these Bosnian Muslims fight for the Germans? Well, what I would say, this is, historians wouldn't say this is controversial to say, but people who have a very simplified understanding of the World War II and don't know much about the facts of how people thought back then, like their perception of what was going on in the world. Many people just thought that, okay, who colonizes the world? It's Britain, isn't it? The British Empire colonizes the world, kills loads of people. Okay, well, they say, well, we hate Britain. Okay, Britain occupies Muslim land by that point in time, Iraq, Egypt, and so on and so forth, yeah? Iraq, so on and so forth. They had protectorates and things like this, they didn't like them. So then all they see is that, well, there's some other Europeans that they look like the British, but they speak a slightly different language, and they hate the British, and they promised us freedom. They promised, like Iraq will be free, Syria will be free. So they just said, and they'll stop importing people into Palestine who have declared they want to make an ethno-state, which is not based on Palestinian Arabs, but based on other Semites too, but they're not the Palestinian identity, not the Palestinian Arabs. So they made, according to their ignorance, they just made a calculation that, let's go with this other European demon power, because at least that demon power is not the particular demon of the British Empire, and that which we hate the most. Stupid logic, ridiculous logic, ignorance, but that's how they thought. Okay. Now, as for the Bosnians, Bosnian Muslims, I mean, there are fault lines between Slavs in Balkans. Surprise, surprise, and the Germans were in essence fighting their enemies, and so they joined them. They thought, okay, well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. A very stupid argument. But you also have to understand that many Germans at the time, or people generally, didn't know about the Holocaust until a bit later on, because the Nazi Party was hiding it from their own population. And why would they do so? Because we think, but if they all hated the Jews, if Germans, it became popular to hate the Jews, why would the Nazi Party hide it from their own people? Because as products of the Enlightenment, they believed that they were humane, right? Even as much as, yes, they shot Jews, they stabbed Jews, they did some very nasty things, but why go to the bother of having gas chambers in showers? Like, it's a bit, why do that and design special gases that will kill very quickly, when you can just spare all that and just use bayonets or whatever, if you want to spare bullets and that kind of. Why all this? Because in the warped minds of the Nazis, following Enlightenment principles, they thought they were humane. So as much as when you want to slaughter animals, you do it in the most humane way, right? So they viewed Jews as less than human beings, but they still thought themselves as humane. So they want to kill Jews in a humane way, but to tell the German public that you're massacring bunches of people, as much as the German public hate, there was a common hatred that was amongst Germans for the minority, certainly exacerbated by the Nazi Party. The average German might be taken aback by men, women, and children all going in to be killed in work camps and things like that. So the Nazi Party hid it from them, although the Nazis. some historians have argued that the Nazis were intending just to all deport Jews, but because of World War II and the Allies coming closer and closer and all this stuff, they moved to a final solution, as they called it, a final solution, because of World War II and because of they thought they wouldn't be able to evict. So they thought they wouldn't be able to evict all Jews in time. If the Allies do come and conquer Germany, then those Jews will return back to being German citizens, and they didn't want that. So, and we couldn't get rid of them fast enough. So then they enacted a much more drastic plan. Some historians have said that. So these things, most of you probably don't know because history requires. A lot of investigating all the evidences and all this stuff to see a bigger picture. But some great historians have written about this stuff. It's a very good thing just for your academic knowledge to learn this. Yeah, I remember I was thinking yesterday, all knowledge is connected. All knowledge is connected. So you see the kind of things we have to talk about in a lecture series about Islam, right? Yeah, because all things are connected. And so I was a bit of a World War II, World War I buff, and I was always fascinated by that because it was a very iconic war. I think many people were. So that's where I started to learn about those kind of things, to understand all the sides. So anyway, I hope that in a roundabout way answers your question that. People make silly decisions based on very shallow criteria. Most of you make your political decisions, if any of you get involved in Canadian politics, based on the most simplest of principles, which is which one looks like a crazy guy. Okay, let's not vote for him. Let's vote for the other guy. That kind of stuff. Like one president. I think was it which president was it? No, it wasn't Lyndon B. Johnson in America. He won an election because they say he was doing a presidential debate and he happened to be taller than his opponent, so people voted for him because he was taller, right? That is why people make very basic decisions, right, on really silly criteria, okay, and that's it. So, yeah, and the Bosnian Muslims who volunteered probably did so. Although I have no doubt that some of them might have been, what you call anti-Semite in the sense of hating Jews, because most Europeans did. Not just the Germans, the French and Italians and Spanish. It was anti-Semitism was quite pervasive. In America, it was quite pervasive. Henry Ford. Yeah, everyone forgets that. The car industrialist, Henry Ford, he wrote tracts about the threat of Jews and Judaism taking over America and all this kind of stuff. Like really nasty populist stuff. The kind of stuff you hear about Muslims today from the most extreme of the far right. So, yeah, unfortunately, Europe just doesn't learn its lesson. It seems like never again, caveat to the same people. But new people come in, yeah, you can do it again. Okay, you put his hand up first before, so I'll go back to you and then I'll go to that brother.
I was just going to say, the Nazis gave Henry Ford a citation for his publications of anti-Semitic writings. Like, they gave him a citation for it.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me. Did you know that many American media outlets played down reports of Jewish death camps coming out of Germany, rumors of it, because they were worried that might prematurely motivate the American public to get America more involved in the war, and America was biding its time. So they wanted to let's just tone it down and not tell people these rumors that we were hearing. Clearly, sometimes humanitarian concerns are not really the major motivating factor of political regimes and things like this. It's very there's no such thing as the perfect good guy, right? In World War II, yeah, every regime did something quite nasty. Although the Nazis did arguably the worst of all, but yeah, the other regimes weren't perfect angels and saints. You, sir.
Hitler got his original ideas from Mein Kampf and the final solution from Jim Crow laws in the United States. So you could argue that Nazism, the worst parts of it, were born from, the ideas were translated from what was going on in the United States.
So, for everyone who didn't hear that, the gentleman said that Hitler got his ideas written in Mein Kampf, My Struggle, which is the translation. from Jim Crow laws in the United States of America, which was in the southern states, which was arguing for a separate but equal regime, as I mentioned before yesterday. This really brings an interesting question about fascism, right? And now I haven't talked about fascism in this mostly because you don't see any Muslims saying, hey, fascism is compatible with Islam, let's be fascist. Because no one will do that, right, currently. But I wouldn't put it past some, actually, to be honest. Just give them time, and you'll find at least one or two. Because Islam has very clear understanding of asabiyya, which is the concept that prevents Muslims from uniting based on any cause other than truth and justice. So we don't unite based on ethnicity. Fascism is a ramped up form of that. But Muslims follow a lighter version of fascism. Some Muslims follow a lighter version of fascism called nationalism, right? And nationalism is a lighter version of it, would you believe? Which argues that a nation state is the model for government, whereby a state represents a nation, a national group, a national culture, a ethno-linguistic group, because that's what a nation is, right? So then, in such nationalist states, the question will always arise: if there's multiple ethnic groups in such a state, who does the government represent? Which collective culture? Yeah, because if you say, oh, but the government represents all the ethnic groups in that land, but then it's not really a nation state anymore, it's just basically an administration over arbitrary geographical boundaries, yeah? And so then there are nationalists who then, that's why you find nationalists are racists and anti-immigration and so on and so forth, because they say that the nation state represents a national culture that originated with one particular majority ethnic, ethno-linguistic group. And if you invite other ethno-linguistic groups into that mix, it waters down whatever the state could represent. And now it just becomes an administration system for a geographical entity, nothing else. And then it doesn't represent the people anymore, because it's not representing anything. Now, a liberal would say, well, that's not a big problem, because as long as everyone has their freedoms and do whatever you want, who cares about what you might call culture? Yeah, it's irrelevant. It's like, you're all individuals, so who cares about a collective culture or representing anything? As long as you vote for the government represents you, who cares? But the nationalists would say, no, but why are we a separate country from other countries? Is because we represent something specific, not just a geographical area. You know, why do we have borders then between, some might ask, why do you have borders between the United States of America and Canada? Here's a great example. And you might say, well, as Canadians, we represent something a little bit different from the Americans. You know, like we don't like shooting up malls and schools, perhaps. No offense to any Americans there, but anyway, but you might arguably say, well, you could plausibly argue that, well, the Americans, to the south of you guys, they're majority Anglo-Saxon. You guys are majority Anglo-Saxons, minus Quebec and Montreal, but let's not talk about them. And so why not unite with them? Because you speak the same language. To a foreigner like me, you sound similar anyway. So maybe close to Albuquerque accent, perhaps. I'm not sure. Anyway, so but you say no. But Canada stands for something different to the United States of America, even though you still have a political system that's liberal, kind of, and voted in. So what's the difference? But you might see a difference because of your particular culture. You might see a reason for the borders, and that's nationalism. Right? Thank you, sir, for your question. Thank you. Okay. I haven't talked about fascism because I haven't found any Muslims yet that basically say they're fascist and they're proud of it. So yeah, that's why. If I do, then we can add it. We can add it to next year's Kufr Awareness Week, fascism as well. We'll add it to the mix. Anyone else? Any other points? You, sir?
Yeah, you said that Marx was a materialist, but at least he was consistent.
Yes.
He also said that he was socially determinist, or economically determinist.
Economic determinist, yes.
And our thoughts is a reflection. He's saying our thoughts are a reflection of the society we're living in.
Yes.
So that will determine the bad and good.
Yes.
So he is also morally relativist.
He's morally relativist, yes.
So how can,
Kind of, yeah.
how can someone can be socially determinist
Yeah,
and morally relativist
yeah.
and escape nihilism?
How can someone be socially determinist and morally relativist and escape nihilism? He doesn't care about nihilism. It doesn't matter, so what? He'll simply say, I don't care about morals even. Morals what? Morals don't mean nothing. Let's look at the science, quote unquote. All he cares about is just how matter works, or the matter of human beings and what we call society. That's all he cares about. He doesn't care about, he says that your concern of being moral or morals is a capitalist idea from the current system. It's not consciousness of the new system that they want to create.
Okay, but how can he trust his own ideas if it's based on the social construct he lives in?
How can he trust his own ideas if it's based on the social construct he's living in? I showed you a slide how he argues it. He says, okay, maybe I didn't let you read it, so I'm going to just show you how he argues this. He basically says that the ideas that he has emerge from the new technological means of production that is possible. And when a new technology comes, it means a new society is possible. So his ideas, which are different to capitalism, reflect the new technology that shows a new system is possible. So of course then, that's where his ideas come from. The new technology. That's how he would say it. Let me find it. Okay, yeah, so here you go. In studying such transformations, it is always necessary to distinguish between the material transformation of the economic conditions of production, which can be determined with the precision of natural science, and the legal, political, religious, artistic, or philosophic, in short, ideological forms in which men become conscious of this conflict and fight it out. Just as one does not judge an individual by what he thinks about himself, so one cannot judge a period of transformation by its consciousness. But on the contrary, this consciousness must be explained from the contradictions of material life, from the conflict existing between the social forces of production and the relations of production. No social order is ever destroyed before all the productive forces for which it is sufficient have been developed, and new superior relations of production never replace older ones before the material conditions for their existence have matured within the framework of the older society. Okay, it's a bit of a long one, but basically, to summarize, which is that if a new technology comes about, a new society is possible, and then that creates the conflict within society. So then the conflict happens because something new comes, and it impacts the previous one, and the struggle begins because there is a contradiction between the society that was based on a previous technology and the existence of a new technology. So, for example, the internet, the social media, Facebook, Instagram, this created radical changes, clashes amongst us, new things like trying to manage our time, not being stuck on social media, and work productivity going down. All these clash because it's a brand new technology that requires a new society for it, right? And so, what you're seeing is a new technology clashing with an existing order based on a previous technology, the 9-to-5 jobs and going to work and on train. So that's what he would say is the reason for he represents the future evolution that is now possible because of new technology. The future evolution of society. That's how he would argue it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I have two questions. The first one is when you said that Karl Marx wants that, like his end goal, his view, or his like what he wants to achieve.
Yep.
That at the very end, the government withers, disappears, and then there's no more government, and people live around like anarchists.
Yes.
How would they not live in a chaotic state where people go about and steal from each other's property and transgress on each other's properties?
Yeah.
That's one question. The second question is not really related to Marxism, but to like philosophy in general. Why do people, why do most people follow these types of philosophies that are not based upon any type of evidence?
I ask myself that question all the time. I'll answer it in reverse order. So people adopt ideas that seem to explain the world despite the fact there's no evidence that says that that idea is the explanation. They're called theories. Okay, that's how you know it. And people might believe it, like many atheist physicists will believe in the multiverse theory. There's the multiple bubble universes or even infinite bubble universes. Do you want to know how much evidence there is for that? Zero. But they use it to explain why is this universe with very specific laws and rules. Yeah, very specific laws, specific size and expansion rate and constants. So if you don't give that explanation, then only way to explain it is something must have decided it then. Oh no, that means God's coming back. We don't want that in our lives. So let's make a new idea. Then, okay, the reason why this universe is a certain shape and size is because every other shape and size is also out there as well. Because if they're all out there at the same time, then you don't need to explain why one of them is the same. Well, actually, that's even bad logic anyway, but that's what they all say. Yeah. So if they've all been made randomly, then that's fine. Yeah. But if it's been made specifically, why that particular size and shape? It's, So they invent a theory to explain, to avoid another explanation they don't like. And they adopt it. Zero evidence. People will believe stuff because it explains, even though there's zero evidence for it. Okay? But that being said, there is part of our fitrah that does that, right? Part of our nature, because it's meant to be able to recognize the truth, and because the truth has no contradictions with it, which means truth will explain everything, right? But the problem with humans is only when we think something explains everything, but it doesn't truly, because you haven't thought about it enough, or you haven't looked at all the possibilities enough, right? Look at Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? When he was trying to seek the Creator before revelation came to him, right? He thought, okay, maybe it's the sun. The sun is the origin of everything. And then it set. Maybe it's the moon. No, then it set. And he realized, okay, it can't be that. So he went with a theory, saw there's a problem with it, then he changed it, right? And then when he saw that even the moon set, he then abandoned the idea that it was anything celestial, and then it must be something greater than those things. You see? So it's natural for us to believe things that explain. The problem is when we don't realize its contradictions with reality itself. But what does the Quran say? Right? Had this come from anything other than Allah, you would have seen inside it many contradictions. So the Quran uses that as a means of testing it. It's like, test it out. Do you see any contradictions between the Quranic explanation of the universe, life, and human beings, with what we can observe of those things? Do you see any contradictions? Do you see any internal contradictions with the Quran? If you don't, then surely we know that only the truth, only real truth, has no contradictions with reality, because it is reality. Understand? So we have an innate nature in us to believe explanations when we think they explain things. The problem is when we don't do enough homework, right, to check those things. I hope that makes any sense. Okay, anyone else?
Wait, the second part.
Oh, yes, what was the second part again?
What's Karl Marx, what's his solution for, after the government disappears?
Yep. What was the solution to maintain public order? Well, Karl Marx will say that after the training wheels come off, everyone will be living in a state of mutual species. Everyone's like part of the species now, part of working for the species. So if you're working for the species and you're not selfish anymore, why would you kill anyone or steal anything? You don't need to steal, and you don't need to kill, because selfishness is a product of capitalism.
That's very naive.
Yeah, it is very naive, but welcome to Marxism, right? I mean, I'm not here to defend it, but I am here to explain accurately to you as I can his ideas, where they are clear-cut, or relatively clear-cut anyway. You, sir, go ahead.
So yesterday you had a slide. There was a couple of points about how under Islam, economic systems that they forbid hoarding.
Yes.
And there were a couple other points that I can't remember as well. And I guess I was anticipating a bit more of a comparison between Marx's perceptions of Western economic theory and Islamic economic theories, because I kind of see some parallels between what Marx would say, okay, don't hoard things because that's a capitalist, individualist thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so Islamic economic systems also say it. So is there not a little bit more compatibility than maybe what you're... I felt like you kind of brushed past that a little bit.
Okay, so the gentleman asks, Islam condemns hoarding of wealth, Marx condemns hoarding of wealth. Is there not a compatibility? Why didn't I discuss those things, compatibilities or commonalities, or even common observations of capitalism that a Muslim would agree with? Well, this is about where Islam fits in, right? These lectures. So I'm only going to mention things where there is a clear contradiction between Islamic ordinances and these particular ideologies. But of course, as I say, a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So of course, when Karl Marx makes observations of capitalism, a lot of those observations are accurate, which you don't need to be a capitalist a communist or Marxist to see or to agree with. The problem that hooked many Muslims onto Marxism or neo-Marxism was because they thought that the criticism of capitalism was so apt, was so accurate, that, let's take his other ideas then. No, just because you know something's wrong doesn't mean that you're right. Right? So it's basically the point. And you don't even need him to know, and he didn't even invent these observations, even, right? Came before him, people noticed these problems with capitalism or industrial revolution. So we don't need Marxism in that sense. But I stated yesterday the problem of the contradiction between Islam and capitalism, which was, there's quite a few things, but admittedly we didn't discuss capitalism as much as I wanted to, because we were discussing the liberalism and conservatism quite sufficiently, quite in depth anyway. But I mentioned merely that Islam contradicts clashes with the core creed of capitalism, which is its misunderstood, misconstructed model of the human economic problem, which it gets completely wrong. Whereas Islam understands that you guarantee people's needs, the state can step into guaranteed needs and leaves distribution of luxuries as laissez-faire, like let everyone just do it as they can according to their strengths and weaknesses to maintain a profit incentive. But there's other aspects that Islam has, which I've done a lecture, I've now done 2 lectures on in my life on economic system of Islam versus capitalism, which is available on YouTube to see, where I just talk about just that one topic, which is capitalism, Islam, and so on and so forth. Ironically, since in 2013, I don't mention Marxism much in my lecture because I didn't think anyone still believed in it, but apparently it's come back. So, all right. Mainly because people are disillusioned with capitalism and they run back to, what other options are there? Let's move this cron out of the way. What other options are there? Oh yeah, okay, Karl Marx, all right, great. And that's what happens, right? So they are yo-yoing between these 2 really bad options. And my exhortation to the Muslims here is, let's give them a real third way. Actually, no, forget third way. We're the first way. Yeah, we came before capitalism and communism. We're the first way. They're the second and third ways, the deviant ways, as we say, and we're the straight path in that sense. So that would be, So, but I feel that perhaps implicit in your question is that I didn't cover the differences between capitalism and enough with Islam and Islam's economic systems more in depth, and I would agree with you, so I didn't cover it enough as I wish I could, but the lecture would have been even longer. I'm more than happy if the MSA were ever to invite me back to discuss the economic system with the promise of French vanilla and Tim Hortons, then I will come, and I shall do so with great aplomb and alacrity. Okay, any other points and things? Okay, you sir?
I think you mentioned...
My favorite color is...
I think you mentioned that Karl Marx, was he Jewish?
Karl Marx was from a Jewish background, but he didn't believe in Judaism anymore.
Because I was going to...
No, he was atheist.
Because then it's like, if that's the background he grew up with, and like his whole argument was your background or how all the social stuff determines how you think,
then why would he conclude that religion is an illusion?
If your background determines what you think, then why would he conclude that religion is an illusion? Again, that's similar to what the brother next to you kind of asked, which is why does he think differently to his wider society? And he would simply argue that because his thinking is a reflection of the new means of production available and the new possibilities of the next evolution of human material society onwards. So that's what he would say to you as he would respond to the brother next to you, basically. So he represents the next evolution of humans, of human ideology, thinking, whatever. So he'll literally say he reflects the new technological opportunities, literally. Literally. Anyway, any other points, comments, contentions? By the way, may God reward you all or guide you all for staying this long. I take it as a great compliment. I can rant for a couple of hours and you're still around at some point. So, all right. Barakallahu feekum.
Allah bless you.
Okay, minna minkum. Thank you, brother. Okay, if that's it, then I hope to see you guys tomorrow for a really spicy session. And also, does anyone know if there's any stab-proof vests I can buy or bulletproof vests for the next sessions coming up, especially on Friday? To campus security, I'm joking, right? We have to shut down the events. There's going to be no actual physical ruckus, so don't worry. All right, barakallahu feekum.